The millionaire decided to test the new maid by leaving the safe open and turning on the camera. The morning sun had barely risen over Manhattan when Richard Sterling stood motionless before his penthouse safe, a small red light blinking steadily from the hidden camera he'd installed the night before. His fingers traced the cold metal door, deliberately left ajar a trap set with precise calculation. For a man who had built $1 billion empire on trust and intuition, this moment felt like a betrayal of his own principles. But something about Emily Blake, his new housekeeper, haunted him. Perhaps it was the way her blue eyes seemed to hold secrets, or how she lingered too long in his study, her gaze always drawn to the family photographs he kept hidden away. In his 25 years of business, Richard had learned that trust must be earned, not freely given. The camera would tell the truth. As he adjusted his Italian silk tie, memories of her interview 6 weeks ago flooded back. She had sat in his leather armchair, her modest grey sweater and worn boots a stark contrast to the penthouse's opulence. Her credentials were impeccable business administration degree, impressive references, yet she wanted to be a housekeeper. When he'd questioned this, her cheeks had flushed pink. "I believe there's much to learn from observing successful people, Mr. Sterling," she'd said softly, eyes downcast, even in the smallest details of their daily lives. He'd hired her despite his reservations, or perhaps because of them. Something in her determination reminded him of himself at that age, hungry for success, willing to start from the bottom. But lately small things had begun to nag at him. The way she seemed to appear in rooms moments after he entered them, how she knew his preferences without being told, the familiar tilt of her head when she was deep in thought. But now, as he rode the private elevator down to his waiting car, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that today would bring answers he wasn't prepared to face. His driver, James, held the door open with practiced precision. "The board meeting starts in 30 minutes, Sir James reminded him. Richard nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the day's agenda. But as the car pulled away from his building, his thoughts kept returning to the safe upstairs. Inside lay not just the cash he'd planted as bait, but something far more precious and dangerous, a photograph taken 23 years ago, showing a younger version of himself with his arms around a beautiful redhead, both of them laughing at a joke long forgotten. Sarah Mitchell, the only woman he'd ever truly loved. The photograph was his most closely guarded treasure, a reminder of everything he'd lost in his climb to the top. He'd placed it there deliberately, next to the money. Because sometimes the true test of character isn't whether someone will steal wealth, it's whether they'll steal secrets. Hours crawled by in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Richard checked the security feed on his phone obsessively, waiting for Emily to enter his study. When she finally appeared on screen at 2:47 p.m., his breath caught in his throat. She moved through her cleaning routine with practiced efficiency, but he could see her awareness of the safe. Once, twice, 3 times her eyes flickered to its partially open door. But she didn't reach for the money. Instead, she did something far worse. With trembling hands, Emily reached for the photograph. Richard watched, transfixed, as she stared at the image, her fingers tracing the faces with a gentleness that seemed almost reverent. Then, to his shock, she pulled an identical photograph from her pocket and held them side by side. The security feed couldn't capture sound, but he could see her lips moving, forming words that sent a chill down his spine. "Mum. Dad." The phone slipped from Richard's numb fingers, clattering onto his desk. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as 23 years of carefully constructed walls began to crumble. Because in that moment, looking at Emily's face in profile against the afternoon light, he finally understood why she had seemed so hauntingly familiar. She had Sarah's eyes. His daughter, the child he'd never known existed, had found her way back to him, not through chance or fate, but through careful calculation. And now, watching her replace the photograph with hands that shook with emotion, Richard Sterling, the man who had built an empire on control and precision, felt his carefully ordered world begin to unravel. The trap he'd set had caught something far more precious than a thief. It had caught the truth. "Cancel my remaining meetings," he barked into his intercom. All of them. It was time to face the past he'd tried so hard to forget. The St. Michael's Children's Home in Brooklyn held nothing but bitter memories for Richard Sterling. At age 7, he had arrived there with nothing but a worn backpack and a crumpled note from his mother promising to return a promise that remained unfulfilled. The orphanage's grey walls and squeaking floorboards became the backdrop to his childhood, teaching him the hardest lesson of all: trust must be earned, and even then, it can be broken. Yet it was within those same walls that Richard discovered his gift for numbers. While other children played in the yard, he would sit by the window of the study hall, poring over discarded business magazines and newspapers, teaching himself about stocks, bonds, and market trends. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly mathematics teacher, recognized his potential and began leaving advanced textbooks on his bed. "You have a mind for business, Richard," she'd tell him, her kind eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "But don't let it harden your heart." At 16, Richard worked 3 jobs while attending high school: janitor in the morning, grocery store clerk in the afternoon, and dishwasher at night. Every penny was meticulously saved, every opportunity for overtime seized. His classmates mocked his worn clothes and tired eyes, but Richard barely noticed. He was too busy studying, planning, calculating his way out of poverty. His break came during his senior year when he overheard 2 customers at the grocery store discussing a failing local business. That night, Richard withdrew his entire savings, $2,732, and bought penny stocks in the company. 3 months later, when the business was acquired by a larger corporation, his investment multiplied tenfold. It was his first taste of real success, and it was intoxicating. Columbia University offered him a partial scholarship, but it wasn't enough. Undeterred, Richard worked as a night security guard, studying between rounds and surviving on vending machine coffee. His professors noticed his drive, his uncanny ability to predict market trends. By his junior year, he was managing small investment portfolios for several of them. After graduation, while his peers sought entry-level positions at established firms, Richard took a risk. He rented a tiny office in a run-down building, using his last dollars to print business cards declaring him the founder of Sterling Investments. His first clients were small business owners, people who recognized in him the same hunger for success they once had. Richard worked 18-hour days, sleeping on an old couch in his office. He learned to read people as well as he read market reports, to sense weakness in a company before it appeared on paper. His reputation grew steadily, the young investor with the Midas touch. When the market crashed in '87, while other firms panicked, Richard remained calm, having quietly moved his clients' investments to safer harbors months before. By 30, Richard had moved his company to a prestigious address on Wall Street. Sterling Investments became Sterling International, then Sterling Global. Each success drove him harder, each achievement pushing him to reach higher. The orphan boy who once counted pennies now counted billions, his name whispered in boardrooms across the world. But success came at a price. The higher Richard climbed, the more isolated he became. Trust, that fragile commodity he'd learned to guard so carefully in the orphanage, became even rarer. Every relationship was analyzed for ulterior motives. Every friendship weighed for its strategic value. The walls he'd built to protect himself became a fortress, keeping others out as effectively as they kept him in. In rare moments of honesty, usually late at night in his penthouse office, Richard would admit that something was missing. His wealth could buy anything, but it couldn't fill the void left by years of loneliness. The photograph he kept hidden in his safe, the one of him and Sarah, was a reminder of the one time he'd let those walls down, the one time he'd risked everything for love, and lost. Now, at 45, Richard Sterling had everything he'd ever dreamed of as that lonely boy in the orphanage. His company employed thousands, his charitable foundation provided scholarships to underprivileged children, and his name was synonymous with success. Yet each night he returned to an empty penthouse, his only companion the memory of what might have been. The hospital bracelet remained in Sarah Mitchell's jewelry box, a faded reminder of the day that changed everything. Mitchell Sarah, twin delivery, one baby had survived Emily. The other, a daughter she'd named Grace, lived for only 6 hours. Sarah never told anyone about her lost child, carrying the weight of that grief alone, just as she carried everything else. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant with twins, Richard had already been gone for 2 months. Her attempts to reach him were met with disconnected numbers and returned letters. The final blow came in the form of a message supposedly from Richard saying he had found someone else. Her sister Rachel's involvement in that deception wouldn't come to light for decades. The prestigious Mitchell family name meant nothing when Sarah refused to give up her babies. "You're throwing your life away," her father had thundered, tearing up the trust fund papers before her eyes. "Either terminate this pregnancy and return to your senses, or you're no longer my daughter." Sarah had walked out of the family mansion that day, 7 weeks pregnant, with nothing but her nursing degree and an unwavering determination to protect her unborn children. She found work at a small clinic in Queens, taking extra night shifts to save money for the baby's arrival. The tiny studio apartment she rented barely fit a bed and a crib, but Sarah transformed it into a home, painting the walls herself and finding second-hand furniture at garage sales. Each evening, she would talk to her unborn daughters, promising them a life filled with love, if not luxury. The day of the twins' birth began with hope and ended in heartbreak. Emily was born strong with powerful lungs and bright eyes, but Grace was smaller, frailer. The doctors worked for hours but couldn't save her. Sarah held her tiny daughter as she took her last breath, memorizing every perfect feature, every precious moment. Later, alone in her hospital room, she made a silent vow to give Emily enough love for 2. The years that followed tested that promise severely. Sarah worked multiple jobs, nursing during the day, waitressing at night, while taking online classes to advance her medical knowledge. She learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep, to stretch $1 until it screamed, to be both mother and father to her growing daughter. The engagement ring she'd once worn with such pride was sold to pay for Emily's first semester of preschool. But Sarah never let Emily see her cry. Instead, she created adventures out of their poverty. When they couldn't afford the zoo, they'd visit the pet store, making up stories about each animal. During power outages, when the electricity bill went unpaid, they'd have camping nights, telling stories by flashlight. Christmas gifts were few but carefully chosen, each one wrapped in paper Sarah saved from her hospital shifts. The hardest moments were when Emily asked about her father. Sarah refused to speak ill of Richard, even as her heart ached with his absence. "Your father is a good man who had big dreams," she would say, showing Emily the one photograph she'd kept. Sometimes dreams take people far away. She didn't mention her own dreams, carefully packed away like the baby clothes she couldn't bear to discard. Years passed, and Sarah built a respectable career as a nurse practitioner. She moved them to a small house with a tiny garden where Emily could have her own room. But success couldn't erase the past. Each time she saw Richard's face in the business news, and he appeared there, often her heart would clench with memories of what they'd shared, what they'd lost. When Emily announced her plan to find Richard, Sarah felt fear and hope wage war in her chest. Fear of more pain, of old wounds reopened. Hope that perhaps, after all these years, the truth would finally come to light. But she kept another secret, the persistent cough that wouldn't go away, the worrying test results hidden in her desk drawer. Sarah had fought alone for so long she couldn't bear to burden her daughter now, not when Emily was finally so close to finding her father. Emily Blake grew up watching her father's success from afar, his face appearing regularly in business magazines that she secretly collected under her mattress. Each new article was carefully clipped and added to her growing collection, creating a paper trail of the father she'd never known. At school, she would sometimes write Emily Sterling in the margins of her notebooks, then hastily erase it before anyone could see. The other children weren't always kind. Birthday parties were the worst, watching fathers swing their daughters around, or hearing her classmates complain about their dads being too strict. Emily learned to smile and pretend it didn't hurt, but each Father's Day project in school felt like a fresh wound. She would make her cards for her mother instead, but they both knew it wasn't the same. By age 10, Emily had memorized every detail about Richard Sterling that she could find. She knew his favorite restaurants from society page photographs, could recognize his preferred brands of suits, and had even learned about his business strategies from financial papers. While other girls had posters of pop stars on their walls, Emily had discreetly pinned a Forbes cover featuring her father behind her closet door. School became her sanctuary and proving ground. She threw herself into business classes, excelling in mathematics and economics, silently competing with the ghost of her father's academic record. When she discovered that Richard Sterling had graduated top of his class at Columbia, Emily spent countless nights studying by lamplight, determined to earn scholarships that would make her worthy of the name she couldn't claim. The questions about her father's absence grew more difficult as she got older. Her mother's gentle explanations that he was a good man who had followed his dreams stopped being enough. Emily began to dig deeper, using her developing research skills to piece together timelines and connections. She created a secret email address, grace.sterling23@gmail.com, named for a sister she never knew she had, and began reaching out to people who might have known her father in his early years. Her breakthrough came during her senior year of high school. While volunteering at a local business archive for extra credit, she discovered an old photograph tucked inside a company prospectus. It showed her father at a charity gala, but what caught her eye was his expression as he looked at an empty chair beside him, a moment of unguarded loneliness that matched what she felt inside. That's when her plan began to take shape. Emily applied to every business school that offered connection to Sterling Global's recruitment programs. She studied articles about Richard's management style, learned about his preferences and habits, and began crafting a persona that would appeal to him as an employer while concealing their connection. The decision to apply as a housekeeper rather than a business intern was strategic. Emily knew she couldn't risk being placed in some distant department. She needed direct access to understand the man behind the empire. Every detail was carefully planned, from her modest wardrobe to her slightly nervous demeanor in the interview. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of being in his presence. The first time she stood in his penthouse office, dusting shelves lined with awards and achievements, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped a crystal plaque. Here was the life she might have shared, the father she might have known, all preserved behind glass and polished metal. Each day brought new discoveries: his preference for Earl Grey tea in the morning, the way he unconsciously hummed while reading reports, how he always straightened pictures on the walls as he passed them. Small details that humanized the legend, making him more achingly real and her deception more difficult to maintain. At night, Emily would return to her small apartment and add new observations to her journal, trying to reconcile the lonely billionaire she served with the father she had imagined throughout her childhood. The truth she was learning was far more complex than any story she had created in her mind. But Rachel Turner had always lived in her sister Sarah's shadow. While Sarah was the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, beloved by their parents, Rachel was the afterthought, the darker, quieter sister who could never quite measure up. Their childhood home, a mansion in Connecticut, held different memories for each of them. For Sarah, it was a place of warmth and encouragement. For Rachel, it was a museum of her own inadequacies. The trauma began when Rachel was 12. Their mother's new husband, Charles, showed a particular interest in the younger sister, cornering her in empty rooms, leaving lingering touches that made her skin crawl. When Rachel finally gathered the courage to tell her mother, She was accused of seeking attention, of trying to ruin her mother's happiness. Sarah, away at college, never knew about these dark moments that shaped her sister's psyche. Rachel learned to survive by becoming invisible, developing a talent for going unnoticed that would later serve her more sinister purposes. She watched as Sarah flourished, earning her nursing degree, falling in love with the ambitious Richard Sterling. Each of her sister's successes felt like another shadow cast over Rachel's existence. But it was Sarah's pregnancy that finally broke something inside her. The day Rachel overheard Sarah practicing how to tell Richard about the baby, something snapped. She saw her chance to finally take something from her perfect sister. Using skills honed through years of staying unnoticed, Rachel intercepted Richard's calls, deleted messages, and finally sent the devastating text that would separate the lovers forever. The satisfaction she felt watching her sister's world crumble was both intoxicating and horrifying. But victory turned bitter quickly. Rachel couldn't escape the guilt that followed, watching her sister struggle alone through pregnancy and loss. When one of the twins died, Rachel's conscience began to torment her. She started drinking heavily, trying to drown out the voice that whispered she was becoming the monster she'd always feared. Her own marriage to Thomas Turner was a desperate attempt at normalcy. Their son, Michael, became her chance at redemption, but the weight of her secrets poisoned everything. Thomas couldn't understand her sudden mood swings, her paranoid fear that someone would take Michael away as punishment for her sins. The marriage crumbled within 5 years, leaving Rachel alone with her guilt and her young son. They moved frequently, Rachel always looking over her shoulder, convinced that her past would catch up with her. She changed jobs constantly: teacher, librarian, bookkeeper, never staying long enough to form connections. Michael grew up watching his mother jump at shadows, learning to tiptoe around her darker moods. The newspapers chronicling Richard Sterling's success became both her penance and her obsession. Each article about his achievements was a reminder of what she had destroyed. She kept a box of clippings hidden in her closet, alongside the phone she had used to send that fateful message, her own twisted museum of regret. When Michael was 12, the same age she had been when her own trauma began, Rachel had a breakdown. The parallels between her son's age and her past became too much to bear. She checked herself into a psychiatric facility, leaving Michael with his father. During those 3 months of therapy, Rachel began to understand the depth of her own damage, how childhood trauma had warped her perception of love and family. After her release, Rachel tried to rebuild her life. She settled in a small town, took a job at the local library, and started attending therapy regularly. But the guilt remained, growing heavier each year. She kept tabs on her sister and niece from afar, sending anonymous gifts on Emily's birthdays, small attempts at atonement that did nothing to ease her conscience. Now, as Emily's search for her father threatened to unravel everything, Rachel found herself facing the consequences of her actions. The carefully constructed walls of her new life were beginning to crack, revealing the darkness she had tried so hard to contain. Her only hope for redemption lay in the truth she had never been brave enough to tell. Emily Blake stood before the mirror in her modest studio apartment, methodically transforming herself into someone else. The expensive thrift store sweater, carefully chosen to look worn but well-made, hung loosely on her frame. She had spent weeks practicing her posture, training herself to appear smaller, less confident, the kind of person who wouldn't threaten a man like Richard Sterling. Her research had been exhaustive. 3 months of working as an unpaid intern at Sterling Global's competitor had given her insights into the corporate culture. She had tracked down former housekeepers, carefully extracting information about Richard's habits, preferences, and daily routines. Each detail was meticulously recorded in a leather-bound notebook: how he liked his coffee black, no sugar, which newspapers he read, first Wall Street Journal, then Financial Times, even which side of the bed he slept on left. The interview process had been grueling. Sterling Global's HR department ran extensive background checks on all employees, especially those with direct access to Richard. Emily had prepared for this, creating a carefully curated history that was completely true, yet revealed nothing of her true identity. Her degree in business administration raised eyebrows. Why would someone so qualified want to be a housekeeper? She had rehearsed her answer countless times in front of her mirror. "I believe success leaves clues, Mr. Sterling," she had said during the interview, eyes downcast, voice soft but earnest. "I want to learn from the best, even if it means starting from the bottom." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did want to learn about him, just not for the reasons she stated. The hardest part had been practicing how to look at him without revealing the storm of emotions beneath her calm exterior. Every morning she would stand before her mirror, training herself to maintain a neutral expression while looking at his photograph. "He's just your employer," she would whisper to herself. Nothing more. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of being in his presence. The first time she entered his penthouse, her hands had trembled so badly she'd nearly dropped the cleaning supplies. The space was exactly as she'd imagined from photographs: immaculate, expensive, and utterly lonely. Family photos were conspicuously absent, replaced by awards and artwork that spoke of success but not happiness. Each day brought new challenges. She learned to time her cleaning schedule to coincide with his brief appearances at home, creating seemingly accidental encounters that allowed her to observe him up close. She noticed things the magazines never mentioned: how he absently straightened pictures as he passed them, the way his shoulders tensed when taking calls from his board members, his habit of staring out the window when he thought no one was watching. The safe had been an unexpected discovery. Hidden behind a painting of the New York skyline, it stood as a testament to the secrets Richard Sterling kept locked away. Emily had noticed him accessing it late one night when he thought she'd left, catching a glimpse of something that made her heart stop: a photograph, identical to the one her mother had kept all these years. Now, 3 weeks into her employment, Emily sat at her small kitchen table, updating her journal. The pages were filled with observations, questions, and theories about the man who had unknowingly shaped her entire life. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the next phase of her plan, letting him catch her interest in the safe, planting the seeds of suspicion that would eventually force a confrontation. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Are you sure about this, Emily?" Some truths might be better left uncovered, but Emily couldn't stop now. She had spent too many years wondering, too many nights staring at newspaper clippings, trying to understand why her father had abandoned them before she was even born. The truth, whatever it was, had to be better than the uncertainty that had haunted her entire life. She touched the locket around her neck, the one containing tiny photographs of her mother and her lost twin sister. Grace's death had been one more secret, one more weight for their family to bear. Emily was determined that there would be no more secrets, no more hidden truths. As she prepared for bed that night, Emily looked one last time at her reflection. Tomorrow would set in motion events that could not be undone. She would either gain the father she had always longed for, or lose even the hope of him forever. Either way, the carefully constructed facade of Emily Blake, the quiet housekeeper, would begin to crack, revealing the truth beneath. The box had remained sealed for 23 years, tucked away in the attic of Sarah Mitchell's modest home. On this rainy Tuesday evening, as Emily slept unaware in her apartment across town, Sarah finally found the courage to open it. Inside lay the physical remnants of the most painful chapter of her life: 2 identical pink baby blankets, each embroidered with a name: Emily and Grace. The hospital documents told a clinical story: Twin A, born 6:42 p.m., healthy. Twin B, born 6:47 p.m., severe respiratory complications. What they couldn't capture was the sound of Sarah's world shattering as she watched doctors fight for 5 hours to save her smaller daughter. Grace had fought hard, her tiny fingers gripping Sarah's pinky with surprising strength, but by midnight she was gone. Sarah lifted the smaller blanket to her face, inhaling deeply. After all these years, she imagined she could still detect the faintest scent of baby powder and hospital antiseptic. Grace had been wrapped in this blanket for the brief hours of her life and for the final moment when Sarah had to say goodbye. The truth about the twins was a secret Sarah had guarded fiercely. Her parents, who had disowned her during the pregnancy, never knew they had lost a granddaughter. Richard, already gone by then, remained unaware he had fathered twins. Even Emily, who grew up surrounded by love, didn't know about her sister. Sarah had convinced herself she was protecting her surviving daughter from unnecessary pain. But the weight of this secret had grown heavier over the years. Sarah saw Grace in every milestone Emily reached alone: first steps that should have been taken in tandem, birthday cakes that should have held 2 sets of candles, school plays that should have starred 2 identical faces. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Sarah would imagine the conversations her daughters might have shared, the special language twins often developed, the unbreakable bond they should have had. Beneath the blankets lay a silver locket, a gift from the hospital's grief counselor. Inside were 2 tiny photographs: Emily as a newborn, pink and crying, full of life and grace, peaceful in eternal sleep, perfect in her stillness. Sarah had worn it every day for a year after the loss, then tucked it away when the pain became too much to bear. The medical records were next, their pages yellow with age. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through them again. The doctors had tried everything to save Grace, but her lungs had been underdeveloped, a common complication in twins. What wasn't common was how it had affected only one baby, leaving Emily healthy while her sister struggled for every breath. A small diary, its pages crinkled from dried tears, contained Sarah's raw thoughts from those early days. "How do I tell Emily about her sister when she's older?" one entry read. "How do I explain that part of her is missing, that somewhere in her heart she might feel an emptiness she can't understand?" At the bottom of the box lay the hardest reminder, a birth certificate for Grace Elizabeth Mitchell, never filed, the space for father's name left blank. Sarah had filled it out in the hospital, hopeful that Grace would survive, that somehow Richard would return, that their family would be complete. Now it served as a testament to all that was lost. Sarah closed the box gently, her decision made. It was time for the truth to emerge. Emily's search for her father had opened old wounds, but perhaps it could also lead to healing. The burden of these secrets had become too heavy to bear alone. Tomorrow she would begin the process of telling Emily about Grace. Her daughter deserved to know about the sister who had shared those first precious months of existence, whose brief life had left an indelible mark on their family. It wouldn't be easy, such truths never were, but Sarah was tired of the walls of silence she had built around their loss. As she returned the box to its hiding place, Sarah touched the spot above her heart where the locket had once rested. Soon, Emily would learn that she had never truly been alone, that her inexplicable feelings of loss had a name and a face. Grace's story deserved to be told, her brief existence acknowledged and mourned, not just by her mother, but by the twin sister who had never known her. The diagnosis lay heavy in Sarah Mitchell's handbag as she walked through the hospital corridors where she had worked for the past 15 years. Stage I ovarian cancer. The words on Dr. Anderson's lips had seemed surreal, like something from one of the medical dramas she occasionally watched. But the scans were undeniable, the blood work conclusive. The persistent fatigue she'd attributed to long shifts, the subtle weight loss she'd blamed on stress, all had darker meanings. "We need to start treatment immediately," Dr. Anderson had urged, his kind face creased with concern for his colleague. "The survival rates are better if we begin aggressive chemotherapy now." Sarah had nodded, accepting the stack of pamphlets and referrals with outward calm, even as her mind raced with calculations of a different sort. Her insurance would cover most of the treatment, but the deductible and time off work would drain her savings, the money she'd been setting aside for Emily's graduate school. Back in her office, Sarah locked the door and allowed herself 5 minutes of tears, no more, no less. She had learned to ration even her grief over the years. Through the window, she could see the hospital's rose garden where she often ate lunch, where she had first noticed the abdominal pain she'd ignored for too long. Now every moment felt precious, weighted with decisions and consequences. Emily's graduation was in 3 months. Sarah had already bought the perfect dress, practiced keeping her proud smile steady for photographs. Her daughter was finally on the verge of meeting her father, of understanding her own history. To burden her now with this diagnosis would derail everything Emily had worked so hard to achieve. The treatment schedule laid out before her told its own story: weekly chemotherapy sessions, possible surgery, months of recovery. Dr. Anderson wanted to begin next week. Sarah picked up her pen, began making notes in her precise nurse's handwriting. If she delayed treatment until after Emily's graduation, after the truth about Richard emerged, her chances would be significantly lower. But her daughter would have the support system she needed: a father, possibly even extended family, to handle whatever came next. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, methodically organizing her finances. Her life insurance policy was substantial, a prudent investment from her early nursing days. The house was nearly paid off. With careful planning, Emily would be provided for, able to pursue her dreams without the weight of medical bills or funeral costs. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy. When Emily called to share her latest observations about Richard, Sarah listened intently, offering encouragement while swallowing back waves of nausea that had nothing to do with her illness. Each conversation felt like a precious gift, another memory to store away. She began recording voice messages on her phone: birthday wishes for future years, advice about love and life, apologies for secrets kept too long. At work, Sarah quietly began training her replacement, documenting her procedures, ensuring her patients would be well cared for. She updated her will, wrote letters to be delivered later, organized photo albums with detailed annotations. Every action was a preparation, a final act of motherly protection. The symptoms became harder to hide. Sarah learned to time her medication around Emily's visits, to apply makeup that disguised her pallor, to wear layers that concealed her dropping weight. When Emily commented that she looked tired, Sarah blamed extra shifts at the hospital, not entirely a lie, as she had been picking up additional hours to pad her daughter's inheritance. One night, unable to sleep through the pain, Sarah found herself in Emily's old bedroom. The walls still held remnants of her daughter's childhood honor roll certificates, dance recital photos, a height chart marked with yearly measurements. Soon Emily would learn about her sister Grace, about her father's innocence in leaving them, about the complex web of circumstances that had shaped their lives. But Sarah's illness would remain her final secret, her last sacrifice for her daughter's happiness. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah made her peace with her decision. She would keep her silence, protect Emily's chance at happiness, at a relationship with her father. There would be anger later, perhaps even resentment at being kept in the dark. But Sarah had carried harder burdens. She would bear this one too, giving her daughter the gift of time to find her father, to understand her past, to build a future unencumbered by worry for her mother's health. Every Thursday afternoon, Richard Sterling left his corporate persona behind and drove to St. Michael's Children's Home in Brooklyn. The aging building hadn't changed much since his time there: the same squeaking floorboards, the same smell of industrial cleaner mixed with cafeteria food. But now, instead of being a resident, he was the anonymous benefactor who had quietly kept the orphanage running for the past 15 years. Today he sat in the library he had funded, watching a small boy struggle with mathematics homework. Tommy reminded Richard of himself at that age: serious eyes, determined set to his jaw, the weight of abandonment carried too young on small shoulders. Without revealing his own history, Richard began helping the boy work through the problems, explaining complex concepts in simple terms. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Parker, the home's director, interrupted gently. "The contractors are here about the new dormitory wing." Richard nodded, giving Tommy an encouraging pat on the shoulder before following her to her office. The walls were lined with photographs of success stories, former residents now in college or starting careers, their smiles testament to the power of second chances. The Sterling Foundation's support went far beyond just St. Michael's. Richard had established scholarship programs at 20 different orphanages across the country, ensuring that any child who showed academic promise would have the opportunity for higher education. But St. Michael's remained special. It was where his own transformation had begun. As he reviewed the building plans with the contractors, Richard's mind wandered to his latest project. He was developing a mentorship program that would pair successful business professionals with orphan teenagers, providing them with role models and practical guidance for their future careers. The idea had come to him after realizing how much difference Mrs. Henderson, his old math teacher, had made in his own life. Between meetings, Richard often found himself in the playground, watching children who carried the same wounds he had nursed at their age. He never spoke about his own time here. His public image carefully omitted those early years, but every decision he made for the foundation was influenced by his personal understanding of their struggles. The new dormitory would feature private study areas, a computer lab, and something Richard had desperately wanted as a child, personal storage spaces where kids could keep their belongings secure. Small dignities that meant everything when you had so little to call your own. His weekly visits were kept strictly confidential, known only to Mrs. Parker and a few key staff members. Richard preferred it this way. His presence wasn't about publicity or corporate image. These hours were his private penance, his attempt to create the support system he had wished for as a child. Today, after finalizing the construction plans, Richard took a detour to his old dormitory room. The narrow space now housed two young girls, their side of the room decorated with pop star posters and school awards. On his bed, his former bed, sat a dark-haired girl about 12, reading intently from a business magazine. The sight stopped him cold. "That's Jessica," Mrs. Parker whispered. "She wants to be a CEO someday." "Reminds me a lot of you." At that age, Richard watched the girl highlight passages about market trends, just as he had done decades ago. The parallel wasn't lost on him, another abandoned child seeking escape through business success. Back in his car, Richard made several calls to his foundation directors, increasing the budget for educational programs and adding specialized business courses for interested students. He had built his empire on calculated risks and strategic planning, but his philanthropic work came from a deeper place, the understanding that every child deserved a chance to rewrite their story. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Richard wondered about his own story, about the possibility that somewhere out there he might have a child of his own. The thought of any child of his growing up in an orphanage haunted him, driving him to expand the foundation's reach, to cast a wider net of support for children in need. As he drove back to his office, Richard reflected on the irony of his life. He had succeeded beyond his wildest childhood dreams, yet found his greatest satisfaction in returning to the place he had once desperately wanted to escape. His work with the orphanage didn't erase the loneliness of his penthouse or fill the void left by Sarah's absence, but it gave purpose to his success, meaning to the empire he had built. Richard Sterling's hands shook as he replayed the security footage for the third time. On the screen, Emily stood in his study, holding two identical photographs side by side, one from his safe, one from her pocket. Her lips formed words that shattered his world. "Mom." Dad, the coffee in his cup, had long gone cold, forgotten in the shock of discovery. "Cancel all my appointments," he barked into the intercom. "And send MS. Blake to my study immediately." His voice remained steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath his controlled exterior. The 7-minute wait for Emily's arrival felt like hours as memories flooded his mind. Sarah's smile, their shared dreams, the message that had destroyed everything. Emily entered with her usual quiet efficiency, but Richard now saw what he'd been blind to before. The way she held herself, Sarah's posture, those eyes his own, staring back at him with a mixture of fear and determination. How had he not seen it sooner? "Close the door, MS." Blakey said softly. Or should I say MS? Mitchell, the color drained from Emily's face, but she lifted her chin, another gesture so like her mother's that it made his heart ache. They stood in silence, 2 decades of unspoken words hanging between them. "How long have you known?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard moved to the safe, opened it with deliberate slowness, and removed the photograph she had examined earlier. "I had my suspicions," he admitted. But this moment he gestured to the security monitor where the footage was paused, confirmed everything. "Why the deception, Emily? Why not just come to me directly?" Emily's carefully constructed composure cracked. "Come to you? Like my mother tried to, hundreds of times? Like all those letters and calls you ignored?" Her voice rose with years of pent-up anger. "You abandoned us before I was even born." Richard staggered as if struck. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother sent me a message saying she'd found someone else. She was the one who ended things." The confusion in his voice was genuine enough to give Emily pause. "That's not possible," she said, but uncertainty had crept into her tone. "Mom tried desperately to reach you. She needed to tell you about." She stopped abruptly, something like panic flashing across her face. "Tell me what?" Richard demanded, stepping closer. "Emily, tell me what?" Tears filled her eyes. "About me. About us. About Grace." The last word came out as barely a whisper, heavy with meaning he couldn't understand. Grace, the name hung in the air between them. Emily reached for her locket, hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, newborn babies, identical in every way except. "My twin sister," Emily said, her voice breaking. "She lived for 6 hours. Mom never told anyone except me, and that was only recently. She tried to tell you, but you were gone. Your number was disconnected. You'd vanished." Richard sank into his chair, the weight of these revelations threatening to crush him. A daughter he'd never known existed, and another he'd never have the chance to know. The room spun as pieces of a 20-year-old puzzle began to shift and realign. "Someone interfered," he said slowly, decades of business instincts kicking in. "Someone intercepted our communications, manufactured that message." He looked up sharply. "Your mother's sister, Rachel. She never approved of our relationship." Emily nodded slowly. "Aunt Rachel disappeared years ago. Mom hasn't heard from her since I was a baby." She took a hesitant step forward. "Dad," the word hung between them, fragile and hopeful. Richard stood, crossing the distance between them in 2 strides. For a moment they stood awkwardly, years of absence creating an invisible barrier. Then Emily's composure crumbled completely, and she fell into her father's arms, sobbing like the little girl she'd never been allowed to be with him. "I'm so sorry," Richard whispered into her hair, his own tears falling freely. "If I had known." "God, Emily, if I had known." They clung to each other, neither willing to let go first, as if afraid the other might disappear. When they finally separated, Richard held her at arm's length, drinking in every detail of her face. "You look so much like your mother," he said softly. But those eyes, he smiled through his tears. "Those are definitely sterling eyes." Emily managed a watery laugh. "Mom always said I had your determination too. And your head for business." She gestured to the business administration degree hanging on his wall. "I graduated top of my class, just like you." Pride swelled in Richard's chest, followed immediately by crushing regret for all the moments he'd missed. But before he could speak, Emily's expression turned serious again. "Dad," she said urgently, "we need to talk about Mom. There's something you need to know." The evening sun cast long shadows across Richard Sterling's penthouse as he paced nervously, waiting for Sarah's arrival. Emily had gone to bring her mother, insisting that 23 years of separation needed to end tonight. His tie felt too tight, his usually immaculate office suddenly seeming cold and impersonal through Sarah's imagined eyes. The elevator's soft chime made his heart stop. Footsteps approached Emily's familiar tread, and another, lighter step that awakened memories he'd buried decades ago. The door opened, and there she was. Sarah Mitchell stood framed in the doorway, time having touched her gently. Her red hair now held strands of silver, but her blue eyes were just as bright, just as capable of seeing straight through his carefully constructed walls. "Hello, Richard," she said softly. The voice that had haunted his dreams for 23 years. He tried to speak, but words failed him. Sarah looked around the office, taking in the evidence of his success awards, photographs of business triumphs, newspaper headlines celebrating Sterling Global's achievements. "You've done well for yourself." Sarah, he stopped, noticed how she seemed to sway slightly. Emily quickly guided her mother to a chair, hovering protectively. Something in their interaction set off warning bells in Richard's mind. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah answered too quickly, but her complexion was pale, almost waxy. Emily shot her mother a worried look that spoke volumes. "We have more important things to discuss." "Mom," Emily pleaded, "he needs to know." Richard moved closer, really looking at Sarah now. The expensive blouse hung loosely on her frame, dark circles beneath her eyes poorly concealed by makeup. His stomach clenched with sudden fear. "Know what?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, the same quiet strength he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "It's not important right now. What's important is understanding what happened. Why you never came back." "I received a message," Richard said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "saying you'd found someone else. That you didn't want me to contact you again." Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him this was news to her. "Your number was disconnected. When I went to your apartment, you'd moved, I thought." "I called you every day," Sarah whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "For weeks. Months." "The pregnancy was difficult, twins," her voice broke. "I wanted so desperately to tell you about our daughters, but you'd vanished." Richard knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. They were cold, too cold, and thinner than they should be. "Sarah, please, what aren't you telling me? What's wrong?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "Stage I ovarian cancer," she said quietly. "I've known for months, but I couldn't tell Emily, not when she was so close to finding you. She needed to know her father first to have that foundation before." "No," Richard interrupted fiercely. "Don't talk like that. There must be treatments, specialists." His mind was already racing, calculating resources, connections, possibilities. "Mom has been delaying treatment," Emily said, her voice thick with tears, "to protect me, to make sure I found you first. But now she couldn't continue." Richard looked at the woman he'd never stopped loving, saw the sacrifice written in every line of her face. 2 decades ago, she'd faced pregnancy and loss alone. Now she was facing this battle the same way. "Not anymore," he said firmly. "You're not doing this alone, Sarah. Not this time." Sarah tried to protest, but exhaustion was evident in every movement. "Richard, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he cut her off. "We lost 23 years because of someone else's manipulation. I lost the chance to know one daughter entirely, to watch this one grow up." He gestured to Emily, who was crying silently. "I'm not losing you too. Not when I've just found you again." Standing, Richard pulled out his phone. "James," he barked when his assistant answered, "get me Dr. Harrison at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Now." "Then clear my schedule for the next month." He turned back to Sarah, his expression brooking no argument. "You're going to fight this. We're going to fight this. Together." Something in Sarah's face softened, a burden visibly lifting from her shoulders. "I'm so tired of being strong alone," she whispered. Richard gathered her into his arms, holding her as gently as if she might break. "You don't have to be." Not anymore. Over Sarah's head, he met Emily's tear-filled eyes. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between father and daughter. They would do whatever it took to save the woman they both loved. Rachel Turner's hands trembled as she stared at her phone, reading the hospital's message for the 10th time. Michael, her 16-year-old son, had been in a car accident. The same hospital where Sarah worked cruel irony that her carefully constructed world would begin to unravel in the place her sister had made her career. The emergency room was chaos when she arrived, her librarian's cardigan clutched tightly around her like armor. Through the sliding doors, she saw a familiar figure in surgical scrubs, Sarah, her red hair escaping from her cap, directing the trauma team. Rachel froze, watching her sister work, unaware that her nephew lay on that gurney. But Mrs. Turner, a young resident, approached. "Your son has sustained serious injuries. He needs immediate surgery." The words washed over her like ice water. "Dr. Mitchell is our best trauma nurse. She'll be assisting." Rachel's world tilted. "No," she whispered. "Please, not her." Another nurse, the resident, looked confused, but before he could respond, Sarah turned and their eyes met across the emergency room. 23 years of secrets hung in that single glance. Sarah's professional mask slipped for just a moment before training took over. Michael Turner, she read from the chart, her voice steady. 16 internal bleeding from vehicular impact. She looked up, realization dawning in her eyes. "This is your son." Rachel nodded, unable to speak. Her sister, the one she'd betrayed, whose life she'd derailed with a single text message, now held her son's life in her hands. Sarah's expression was unreadable as she processed this information. "He needs surgery now," Sarah said simply. "I'm the most experienced trauma nurse on duty. Whatever is between us doesn't matter. Michael is what matters." The professional distance in her voice was worse than anger would have been. Hours passed in the waiting room, each minute an eternity of regret. Rachel thought of the message she'd sent all those years ago, destroying her sister's happiness out of jealousy and pain. Now fate had brought her here, dependent on Sarah's skill and dedication to save her only child. Richard Sterling arrived sometime during the third hour, his commanding presence drawing every eye in the waiting room. Rachel shrank into her chair, but he walked straight to her. "Sarah called me," he said simply, sitting beside her. "She thought you might need someone here." The kindness in his voice broke something in Rachel. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears falling freely. "The message. It was me. I sent it. I made you believe Sarah had found someone else. I destroyed everything because I couldn't bear to see her happy when my own life was so dark." Richard was silent for a long moment. "I know," he finally said. "We figured it out. Sarah, she's fighting cancer now. Did you know that Rachel's sharp intake of breath was answer enough? She delayed treatment to help Emily find me, to repair what your actions broke." Shame crashed over Rachel in waves. "I never meant. I was so young, so angry. Our stepfather," she stopped, decades of buried trauma threatening to surface. "I wanted someone else to hurt like I was hurting. And now your son is in there, and Sarah is fighting to save him," Richard said quietly. "Despite everything you did, she's still being the big sister who protects you." The surgery lasted 6 more hours. When Sarah finally emerged, her scrubs spattered with blood, exhaustion evident in every line of her body, Rachel stood on shaking legs. "Michael," she whispered. "He's stable," Sarah said. "The internal bleeding was severe, but we managed to repair the damage. He's young and strong. He'll recover." She swayed slightly, and Richard stepped forward to steady her. "Sarah," Rachel began, but her sister held up a hand. "Not now," Sarah said firmly. "Get some rest. Be there when Michael wakes up. We'll talk later." She turned to leave, then paused. "He has your eyes, Rachel, but he has Mum's smile. The kind one, the one you used to have before everything went wrong." As Sarah walked away, supported by Richard, Rachel sank back into her chair. Her son would live, saved by the sister she had wronged so deeply. The weight of her guilt, carried for 23 years, felt suddenly unbearable. "She'll forgive you," Richard said quietly. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she will. Sarah has always had more grace than any of us deserve." Rachel touched the worn Bible in her purse, the one she'd carried since leaving home at 18. Inside was a photograph of 2 young sisters, arms around each other, both smiling without shadows in their eyes. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. "None of us do," Richard replied. "That's what makes it Grace." The box slipped from Sarah's trembling hands, spilling its contents across the hospital room floor. She had brought it to show Richard, to finally share the full truth about their daughters, but her weakened state had betrayed her. As Richard knelt to help gather the scattered items, he froze, picking up a birth certificate he had never seen before. "Grace Elizabeth Sterling," he read aloud, his voice catching. The paper was worn, unfiled, bearing the same date as Emily's birth. His eyes moved to the tiny footprints stamped at the bottom, so similar to the ones in Emily's baby book, yet belonging to a different daughter, one he had never known. "She lived for 6 hours," Sarah said softly from her hospital bed, where she was recovering from her first round of chemotherapy. "She was smaller than Emily, but she fought so hard. The doctors did everything they could." Her voice broke. Decades of solitary grief finally finding release. Richard sat heavily in the chair beside her bed, still holding the birth certificate. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, not accusingly but with deep sadness, "when we found each other again." "I thought I was protecting Emily," Sarah admitted. "She had just found her father. I didn't want to burden her with the knowledge of the sister she lost, not when everything was so new and fragile." The door opened and Emily entered, stopping short at the sight of the scattered mementos. Her eyes locked on the small pink blanket emblazoned with "Grace, Mom," she whispered. "What is all this?" Sarah reached for her daughter's hand. "Sit down, sweetheart. There's something I need to show you." With trembling fingers, she opened the silver locket she had kept hidden for so many years. Inside were 2 tiny photographs of Emily as a newborn, and another baby, almost identical but smaller, more fragile. Emily stared at the images, her hand unconsciously rising to touch her own locket, the one containing the same photograph of herself. This was my sister," she asked, her voice barely audible. "My twin." "Your father didn't know," Sarah said quickly, seeing the shock and hurt in Emily's eyes. "I tried to tell him, but then everything happened with Rachel's interference, and he was gone. By the time Grace..." She couldn't continue. Richard moved to sit on the edge of Sarah's bed, creating a circle with his daughter and the woman he had never stopped loving. "Tell us about her," he said gently. "Tell us about our daughter." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she began to speak. "She had your chin, Richard, just like Emily does. And when she gripped my finger, she had such strength for someone so tiny. The nurses said they'd never seen such a fighter." As Sarah spoke, Emily discovered a collection of letters in the box, letters she had never sent to Richard, each one detailing their daughter's development during the pregnancy. The joy of first hearing 2 heartbeats. The fear when one baby showed signs of struggling. The desperate hope that both would survive. "I feel like I've always known," Emily said suddenly. "There were times growing up when I felt incomplete, like part of me was missing. I used to think it was because I didn't have a father, but maybe..." She touched the photograph of her sister again. "Maybe I was missing her too." Richard pulled his daughter close, letting her cry against his shoulder. "Grace will always be part of our family," he said firmly. "We may not have known her in life, but we can honor her memory now. She brought us together in a way. If your mother hadn't been carrying twins, she might not have tried so hard to reach me." "The doctors said it was twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome," Sarah explained softly. "Grace's circulatory system was sending too much blood to Emily. She sacrificed herself in a way so her sister could be strong and healthy." Emily lifted her head from her father's shoulder. "Then I need to live for both of us," she said with quiet determination. "Everything I achieve, every success, every joy, it's for Grace too." Sarah reached for the small pink blanket, running her fingers over the embroidered name. "I think she knows," she whispered. "I think she's been watching over both of you all these years." As the family sat together, sharing memories and tears, healing began to take root. Grace's story, finally told, became not just a tragedy but a bridge connecting past to present, lost to love, broken pieces to new wholeness. The Sterling penthouse underwent its first transformation on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after Sarah's initial chemotherapy session. Emily supervised as movers brought in comfortable furniture to replace the stark, modern pieces that had defined Richard's bachelor life. But Sarah, wrapped in a soft blanket on the newly arrived oversized couch, offered weak suggestions about color schemes and placement. "The medical equipment can go in the guest room," Richard directed, his usual commanding tone softened by concern as he watched Sarah's pale face. He had converted his home office into a private treatment room, complete with hospital-grade monitoring systems. Money, for once, served a purpose beyond mere accumulation. Emily arranged family photographs on the walls, images from her childhood that Sarah had preserved, alongside newer ones of all three of them together. The empty spaces between the frames seemed to cry out for the missing years, the moments they could never recapture. Adjusting to their new family dynamic proved challenging. Richard, accustomed to solving problems with swift decisiveness, struggled with the helplessness of watching Sarah battle cancer. His instinct to control, to fix everything, clashed with the reality that some things couldn't be commanded into submission. "You can't schedule my recovery like a business meeting," Sarah told him gently one evening, after he had presented her with a detailed timeline for treatment milestones. "This journey doesn't follow a strategic plan." But Emily found herself caught between roles: daughter, caregiver, bridge between her parents. She watched them rediscover each other, noting how her father's hand would linger on her mother's shoulder, how Sarah's eyes followed Richard when he wasn't looking. But she also saw their frustrations, Richard's impatience with Sarah's independence, Sarah's struggle to accept help after decades of self-reliance. Family dinners became their anchor, even on days when Sarah could barely eat. They established new traditions: Richard reading business proposals aloud, Emily sharing stories from her childhood, Sarah teaching them both her grandmother's recipes when she felt strong enough to sit in the kitchen. "Tell me about my first steps," Emily asked one evening, watching her parents exchange glances over soup bowls. "Did I walk early or late?" "Early," Sarah smiled. "You were so determined. Just like your father," they said together, and the moment hung between them, sweet, painful, healing. The hardest days were after chemotherapy, when Sarah's body rebelled against the very treatment meant to save her. Richard would pace outside the bathroom door, helpless as Emily held her mother's hair back, whispered soothing words learned from years of being the only source of comfort. "Let me," Richard said one particularly difficult night, gently moving Emily aside. "Go rest, sweetheart. I've got this." Emily watched from the doorway as her father, the powerful CEO, knelt beside her mother, tenderly wiping her face with a cool cloth. 2 decades of separation dissolved in simple acts of care. They celebrated small victories: Sarah keeping down a full meal, a promising blood test, the first time she felt strong enough to walk to the corner store. Each triumph brought them closer, but also highlighted the fragility of their newfound unity. "I'm afraid," Emily confessed to her father late one night, finding him staring out at the city lights. "What if we don't have enough time? What if we lose her just when we're becoming a real family?" Richard pulled his daughter close, letting her cry against his expensive suit. "Then we make every moment count," he said firmly, "and we show her that the love she protected all these years was worth everything." They developed routines around Sarah's good days and bad days. Richard rearranged his entire corporate schedule, conducting meetings via video conference from home when Sarah needed him. Emily took a leave of absence from her job, though Sarah protested the sacrifice. "You've put your life on hold for me too many times," Sarah argued. "Both of you have your own paths to follow." "You are our path," Richard replied, his voice brooking no argument. "Everything else can wait." The penthouse slowly transformed from a showcase of success into a home filled with evidence of life. Emily's laptop and research papers spread across the dining table, Sarah's knitting basket beside her favorite chair, Richard's reading glasses left carelessly on kitchen counters. Family photos multiplied on walls and shelves, tracking their journey from broken pieces to growing wholeness. Yet shadows lingered. Grace's absence felt stronger now that they acknowledged her, an empty space at their table that could never be filled. Sarah kept her daughter's blanket close during treatments, drawing strength from the memory of another fighter. She would have loved this, Sarah said softly one evening, watching Richard and Emily argue good-naturedly over a chess game. Seeing her family together at last. They were learning to be parents and child, husband and wife, all at once, roles delayed but not denied. Each day brought new challenges, Richard learning to share authority in his own home, Emily balancing daughterly love with protective instincts, Sarah accepting that strength sometimes meant allowing others to be strong for her. The board meeting erupted into chaos as Marcus Bennett, Richard's CFO of 15 years, presented the damning evidence. Spreadsheets and bank statements flashed across the screen, showing systematic fund diversions from Sterling Global's charitable foundation to offshore accounts. As you can see, Marcus said, his practice concern masking triumph, these transactions bear Mr. Sterling's digital signature. The evidence suggests he's been embezzling from his own foundation for years. Richard sat motionless at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled fury. The evidence was expertly fabricated. He had to admire the technical precision of the forgery. Every board member's eyes were fixed on him, years of trust wavering in the face of seemingly irrefutable proof. "This is absurd," he stated calmly, though his hands clenched beneath the table. "I demand a full forensic audit." "Already arranged," Marcus replied smoothly. "The auditors arrive tomorrow. In the meantime, the board must consider temporary leadership changes to protect the company's interests." The vote was swift and merciless. Richard found himself suspended pending investigation, his access to company systems revoked, his badge collected by security. As he rode the elevator down from the office he'd built from nothing, his phone buzzed with news alerts. The story had already leaked to the press. At home, Sarah was resting after her latest treatment, while Emily pored over the financial documents spread across the dining table. "The timestamps are wrong," she muttered, her business degree proving invaluable. "Look, these transactions supposedly occurred while you were in the hospital with Mom during her first chemotherapy session." Richard loosened his tie, studying the papers. "Marcus has been planning this for months, maybe years. He waited until I was distracted with family matters, thought I'd be too preoccupied to fight back." Sarah appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, looking frail but determined. "Then we fight," she said simply, "together." The next few weeks became a battle for survival. Richard's personal assets were frozen, the foundation's work suspended, and charitable projects halted mid-construction. St. Michael's Children's Home faced closure without the promised funding for their new dormitory wing. Emily proved herself her father's daughter, working through nights to trace the money trail. Her fresh perspective spotted patterns the auditors missed. "The fake transactions all route through the same series of shells," she explained, her eyes bright with discovery. "And look at the timing, they align perfectly with Marcus's own business trips." Richard's network of business contacts cultivated over decades proved both blessing and curse. Some longtime allies distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with scandal. Others, remembering past kindnesses, offered crucial support and information. Marcus has been meeting with Westbrook Industries, a former board member confided over a discreet lunch. They're planning a hostile takeover once Sterling Global stock crashes. The press was relentless. Paparazzi camped outside the building, hoping to catch the fallen king of Wall Street in a moment of weakness. Richard maintained his dignity, focusing on protecting his family and clearing his name. Sarah's health took a downturn from the stress, leading to an emergency hospital admission. As Richard sat by her bed, holding her hand through another sleepless night, he wondered if his empire was worth the cost. "Don't you dare give up," Sarah whispered, reading his thoughts as she had always done. "Those children counting on the Foundation's support, they need you to fight." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rachel, seeking redemption, used her librarian skills to dig through archived records. She discovered old documentation proving Marcus's involvement in a similar scheme at his previous company, a case that had been quietly settled out of court. Emily worked with the forensic auditors, her knowledge of her father's habits helping to prove the impossibility of his involvement in the fraudulent transactions. Dad refuses to use digital signatures for Foundation transfers, she testified. He signs everything by hand because he says each charity deserves personal attention. The final confrontation occurred during an emergency board meeting. Richard, armed with evidence of Marcus's true activities, orchestrated a masterful counterattack. As the proof of manipulation and forgery unfolded, Marcus's carefully constructed scheme collapsed. "You were so busy studying my business methods," Richard told his former friend quietly, "that you forgot to study my character. I built this company on trust and integrity. Those aren't just words on our mission statement." Marcus was led out by security, facing multiple federal charges. The board, shamefaced, voted unanimously to reinstate Richard with full powers. Stock prices stabilized as the truth emerged and the Foundation's work resumed. But the experience had changed Richard's perspective forever. "I want you to take a more active role in the company," he told Emily that evening. "Not because you're my daughter, but because you've proven yourself more than capable." Sarah, recovered enough to join them for dinner, smiled at their matching expressions of determination. "The Sterling legacy continues," she said softly, stronger for having been tested. Emily Blake stood at the podium of Columbia University's graduation ceremony, her valedictorian speech cards trembling slightly in her hands. In the audience, Sarah sat in her wheelchair, a bright scarf covering the effects of chemotherapy, her proud smile outshining her exhaustion. Beside her, Richard Sterling watched with glistening eyes as the daughter he'd only recently found prepared to address her graduating class. "Success isn't measured by the obstacles we avoid," Emily began, her voice growing stronger with each word, "but by the ones we overcome." Her gaze swept across the sea of faces before finding her parents again. "Some of us worked multiple jobs to afford these degrees. Some studied in hospital waiting rooms while caring for loved ones. Some carried dreams that weren't just our own." The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Emily remembered countless nights working at the local diner, then studying until dawn in their tiny apartment. Sarah had sometimes found her asleep over her textbooks, gently covering her with a blanket before heading to her own night shift at the hospital. Her academic record was impeccable, perfect GPA, president of the Business Students Association, internships at prestigious firms, but few knew the real story behind those achievements. How she'd turned down social invitations to take extra tutoring jobs, saving every penny toward tuition. How she'd worn the same 3 outfits all freshman year, rotating them carefully to appear more prosperous than they were. The scholarship committee had initially rejected her application, citing her unstable family background as a risk factor. Emily had marched into their office, armed with her mother's medical records and her own financial projections, arguing her case with such passion and precision that they'd reversed their decision on the spot. "Your determination reminds me of someone the head of the committee had said, smiling. A young man who once stood in this same office many years ago." She'd later learned he was referring to Richard Sterling, though she hadn't known then that she was following her father's footsteps. During her sophomore year, when Sarah's first health scare had forced her to miss 2 weeks of classes, Emily's professors had been divided in their response. Some offered extensions and extra help, others suggested she reconsider her academic priorities. She'd completed every assignment on time anyway, studying in emergency rooms and hospital cafeterias, proving her commitment beyond any doubt. Her business plan for a healthcare accessibility platform had won the university's innovation competition, inspired by watching her mother navigate the complexities of medical insurance. The prize money had paid for Sarah's first round of experimental treatments before Richard had re-entered their lives. Excellence isn't just about natural talent, Emily continued in her speech, her voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. It's about persistence, about getting up one more time than you fall, about believing in yourself when no one else does. Her fingers touched the locket containing Grace's picture, drawing strength from her silent sister. The internship at Sterling Global had been her most daring gambit, using her skills to infiltrate her father's world while maintaining her academic excellence. She'd worked triple shifts, classes in the morning, her role as Richard's housekeeper in the afternoon, and studying deep into the night. Her thesis on ethical corporate governance had earned special recognition, though few knew it was partially written during her mother's chemotherapy sessions. The irony wasn't lost on her when it later helped expose Marcus's attempted takeover of Sterling Global. We stand here today not as individuals, Emily's voice filled with emotion, but as the sum of every person who believed in us, who sacrificed for us, who taught us the true meaning of strength and perseverance. Her eyes met Sarah's, acknowledging the woman who had given everything to secure her daughter's future. Richard's face showed a complex mixture of pride and regret, pride in her achievements, regret for the struggles he hadn't been there to ease. But Emily's next words were meant for him too. It's never too late to complete our stories, to find missing pieces, to become who we were always meant to be. As she concluded her speech to thunderous applause, Emily felt a profound sense of completion. Her academic achievements weren't just letters on a transcript, they were proof that love could overcome any obstacle, that determination could bridge any gap, that excellence could be born from adversity. Later, at the small celebration in Richard's penthouse, Emily found herself surrounded by the tangible results of her dedication, her diploma, her job offer from Sterling Global's executive training program, and most importantly, her parents together, watching her with shared pride. The private investigator's file landed on Richard's desk with a heavy thud. Inside were 23 years of Rachel Turner's life, traced through towns and aliases, each move seemingly driven by an unseen terror. Sarah sat beside him, her hands steady despite her weakness, as they began to uncover the truth about her sister's disappearance. She never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years, Richard noted, spreading out a timeline of Rachel's movements. Always small towns, always small towns, always jobs that kept her invisible: library assistant, bookkeeper, school secretary. The pattern spoke of someone running, not just from them, but from something darker. Emily discovered the first breakthrough in a stack of old newspaper clippings. A domestic violence report from their childhood home, carefully worded to protect the family's reputation. "Mom," she called softly, "did you know about this?" Sarah's face went pale as she read the article, memories she'd tried to forget surfacing with painful clarity. "Our stepfather," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Charles Mitchell. Rachel tried to tell me once, but I was away at college, focused on my own life. I didn't want to believe she couldn't continue, the weight of her unintended betrayal heavy in the air." The truth emerged piece by piece. Charles Mitchell had been a respected businessman, his abuse hidden behind closed doors and social status. Rachel, younger and more vulnerable, had borne the brunt of his attention. When she finally gathered the courage to speak up, their mother had chosen to believe her husband over her daughter. That's why she did it, Sarah realized, tears rolling down her cheeks. Why she separated Richard and me. She couldn't bear to see anyone happy. Not after what happened to her. The revelation brought understanding, but not absolution. The damage done was too deep, too far-reaching. Michael's accident had brought Rachel back into their orbit, but she remained elusive, visiting her son in the hospital only during off hours to avoid confrontation. It was during one of these visits that Emily finally cornered her aunt in the hospital cafeteria. "You owe us the whole truth," Emily said firmly, sliding into the seat across from Rachel. "Not just about the message you sent, but about everything. We need to understand." Rachel's hands trembled around her coffee cup, Some truths are too ugly, she whispered. Some shadows too dark to bring into the light. But the truth refused to stay buried. Richard's investigators uncovered court records, sealed by money and influence, detailing Rachel's attempts to seek justice. Each complaint dismissed, each cry for help silenced by Charles Mitchell's connections and their mother's willful blindness. "He's still alive," Richard reported grimly one evening. Living in Florida, remarried 3 times. Each wife younger than the last, the implication hung heavy in the air. The pattern of abuse likely hadn't ended with Rachel. Sarah's cancer treatments had to be postponed for a day when she learned that her mother had always known, and had chosen to protect her husband instead of her daughter. The betrayal was complete, extending beyond Rachel to encompass both sisters. "We have to find her," Sarah insisted despite her weakened state. "Not just for the past, but for Michael. He deserves to know his mother's whole story, to understand what shaped her." The search led them to a small library in Vermont, where Rachel had worked for the past year. She was different from Sarah's memories, smaller somehow, as if years of carrying secrets had compressed her very being. When she saw them waiting in her office, she didn't run. "I knew you'd come eventually," she said quietly. "After Michael's accident, after everything came out, I knew it was time." The story she told left them stunned. Years of abuse, carefully documented but never acted upon. A system that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. A young girl's desperate attempts to be heard, to be believed, to be saved. "When I saw you with Richard," Rachel told Sarah, so happy, so loved, "something broke inside me. If I couldn't have safety and love, why should anyone else?" Her voice cracked. "I know now how wrong that was, how much damage I caused. But at the time it felt like the only power I had." The envelope arrived at Richard's penthouse on a Tuesday morning, Rachel's precise handwriting addressing it to Sarah, Richard and Emily jointly. Inside was a thick bundle of papers, a confession 2 decades in the making. But it was the shorter note paper clipped to the front that made Sarah's blood run cold. "By the time you read this, I will have made things right. I'm sorry. Please take care of Michael." Richard was already dialing the police as Emily snatched the address from the envelope. "She's at the Vermont house," Emily said, grabbing her car keys. "We can be there in 4 hours." 3, Richard corrected, ushering them toward the elevator. Sarah insisted on coming despite her weakened condition, clutching Rachel's letter as they raced through morning traffic. The confession spilled out page by page as Sarah read aloud during the drive. Rachel detailed everything: the years of abuse by their stepfather, their mother's calculated blindness, the twisted logic that led her to destroy her sister's happiness. Each revelation was a knife to Sarah's heart, memories shifting and reforming to show signs she should have seen. "Charles started small," Sarah read, her voice shaking. "A lingering touch, a look that lasted too long. I was 12 the first time he came to my room. When I told Mom, she said I was imagining things, that I was jealous of her happiness. After that, I learned to be quiet, to make myself invisible. But watching Sarah find love with Richard, it broke something in me. If I had to live in darkness, why should she have light?" The Vermont house was silent when they arrived, late afternoon shadows stretching across the unkempt lawn. A local police officer was already there, looking grim. "We found her in the bathroom," he reported. "She's alive, but barely. The ambulance is on its way." They found Rachel on the bathroom floor, pale but breathing, an empty pill bottle beside her. Sarah, despite her own illness, snapped into nurse mode, checking vital signs while they waited for paramedics. Emily found more letters in Rachel's bedroom, one for Michael, one for each of them, and a sealed envelope addressed to the district attorney. "Evidence," Richard said quietly, scanning the contents. "Names, dates, bank records, everything needed to prove what Charles Mitchell did. She's been gathering it for years." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical jargon. Sarah insisted on riding along, holding her sister's hand as Rachel drifted in and out of consciousness. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered once, her voice barely audible. "I was so lost in my own pain I couldn't see past it." At the hospital, while doctors worked to save Rachel, Emily read the letter addressed to her. "Dear niece, it began, I robbed you of your father, of your parents' love story, because I couldn't bear to see the happiness I thought I'd never have. The truth is, you were the innocent one in all of this. You and Grace both paid the price for my brokenness." Richard's letter contained a detailed account of how Rachel had intercepted communications between him and Sarah, including copies of the original messages she'd hidden. "I watched you build your empire," she wrote, "and told myself you were better off without us. But seeing you with Emily now, I know what I really stole was a father's love for his child." Sarah's letter was the longest, pages of apology and explanation. "You were always the strong one," Rachel wrote. "The good one. I thought breaking your happiness would make my pain easier to bear, but it only doubled it. Seeing you fight cancer with such grace, still putting everyone else first. I finally understand what real strength looks like." The letter to Michael broke all their hearts. "My precious son." It read, "Everything I did, every move, every lie, was to protect you from the darkness in our family's past. But in hiding the truth, I only created new shadows. Your Aunt Sarah showed me what a parent's love should look like. Learn from her example, not mine." As dawn broke over the hospital, Rachel stabilized. The doctors said she would recover physically, but the road to mental healing would be longer. Sarah, exhausted from her own illness and the emotional strain, refused to leave her sister's side. "We were both victims," she told Richard quietly. "Rachel dealt with her trauma by lashing out, while I dealt with mine by trying to protect everyone else. Neither way was healthy." Emily found herself stepping into a new role, coordinating care for both her mother and aunt while helping Michael process the revelations about his family's past. The sealed evidence Rachel had gathered was in Richard's safe, waiting for the moment they would finally confront Charles Mitchell. "The truth doesn't heal all wounds," Emily told her cousin as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, "but secrets poison them. Maybe now we can all start to really heal." The monitor's steady beeping had become the soundtrack of their lives. Sarah Mitchell's room in the oncology ward was filled with flowers, cards, and family photos, attempts to bring warmth to the sterile space. But nothing could disguise the truth written in her rapidly declining vital signs. "The cancer has spread," Dr. Anderson explained gently, his eyes meeting Richard's over Sarah's bed. The delay in treatment, combined with the stress of recent events he didn't need to finish. They all understood that Sarah's choice to postpone treatment for Emily's sake, followed by the emotional trauma of Rachel's suicide attempt, had given the disease the advantage it needed. Richard hadn't left the hospital in 3 days, his usually immaculate suits wrinkled from sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Sarah's bed. Emily moved between her mother's room and her aunt's floor, trying to support both women while holding herself together. "You need to rest," Sarah whispered to Richard one evening, her voice weak but still carrying that note of authority she'd developed over years of nursing. "Running yourself into the ground won't help anyone." "I lost 23 years with you," he responded, taking her fragile hand in his. "I'm not losing another minute." The unspoken fear hung between them. How many minutes did they have left? Emily found them like that hours later, both asleep, still holding hands. She quietly adjusted her mother's oxygen tube and added another blanket to her father's shoulders. At 23, she felt ancient, weighted down by the responsibility of keeping their fractured family together. Sarah's lucid moments became increasingly rare as the medications increased. During one clear spell, she asked for her box of keepsakes. "There's something I need you both to see," she insisted. Inside was a journal she'd kept during her pregnancy, filled with letters to her unborn twins. "Dear Emily and Grace," she read aloud, her voice surprisingly strong. "Today I felt you both move for the first time. Emily, you're already the stronger one, always kicking. Grace, you're quieter, but I feel your gentle presence." She couldn't continue, tears overwhelming her. Richard took the journal, reading where she left off. "I don't know if your father will ever know about you, my precious girls, but I want you to know that you were born from love. Real, true love that circumstances couldn't break." The doctors suggested hospice care, but Sarah refused. "I want to stay here," she insisted. "Where I can see the sunrise over the city." Richard immediately hired round-the-clock private nurses, transforming the hospital room into a space that balanced medical necessity with comfort. Rachel, recovered enough to leave her own hospital room, began spending her days with her sister. The two would talk quietly for hours, healing old wounds while facing new ones. "I wasted so much time on anger," Rachel said one afternoon. "And now time is the one thing we don't have enough of." Emily threw herself into research, consulting specialists worldwide, looking for experimental treatments or clinical trials. Richard used every connection he had, called in every favor, but the answers were always the same. The cancer had progressed too far. "Stop," Sarah told them both firmly during a family meeting. "I don't want my last days spent chasing miracles. I want them spent making memories." So they did. They brought in a photographer to capture family portraits, Sarah insisting on being properly dressed and seated in her favorite chair rather than the hospital bed. They had dinner parties in her room, complete with tablecloths and battery-operated candles, sharing stories and laughter despite the circumstances. Sarah's strength ebbed like a tide, each wave taking more than it left behind, but her spirit remained undiminished. She helped Emily plan her first major project at Sterling Global, advised Richard on the foundation's new initiatives, and even began teaching Rachel basic nursing skills so she could help care for Michael's ongoing recovery. "Promise me something," she said to Richard late one night, when pain kept her awake. "Promise you won't let guilt over the past overshadow Emily's future. She needs a father, not a man trying to make up for lost time." Richard struggled to speak past the lump in his throat. "I promise. But Sarah, you need to promise too. Promise you'll keep fighting." Her smile was gentle but firm. "I promise to fight as long as I can. But more importantly, I promise that whenever you look at Emily, you'll see how our love survived everything: distance, time, misunderstandings. She's the proof that real love never dies." The boardroom of Sterling Global fell silent as Richard finished speaking. He had just announced his intention to step down as CEO, effective immediately. The Shanghai expansion project, worth billions, lay abandoned on the polished conference table between them. "This is business suicide," Marcus Bennett declared, recently reinstated after proving his own innocence in the earlier scandal. "The Asian markets won't wait, Richard. If we don't move now, we lose everything we've worked for." Richard stood at the window, watching the city he'd conquered spread out below. 24 hours earlier, he'd sat in Sarah's hospital room, listening to her labored breathing, when the call came about the Shanghai deadline. The choice crystallized in that moment: empire or family, achievement or love. "My wife is dying," he said quietly, turning to face the board. The word wife caught in his throat. They'd married in a small ceremony in Sarah's hospital room just days ago, Emily serving as both witness and bridesmaid. "I've already lost 23 years. I won't lose these final moments chasing another deal." The board erupted in protests and counter-arguments. The shareholders' interests, market position, competitor advantages, all the familiar language of corporate warfare. Richard listened silently, remembering similar meetings where he'd been the one arguing for business over personal concerns. "I'm not abandoning the company," he continued when the noise died down. "Emily will assume the role of interim CEO. She knows this business, understands our values, and has proven herself more than capable during the recent crisis." More objections followed. Emily was too young, too inexperienced, too emotionally invested. Richard held up his hand, silencing them with the authority he'd earned over decades. My daughter, he emphasized the word, watching several board members shift uncomfortably, has shown more integrity and business acumen in her short time here than many who've sat at this table for years. She's a Sterling not just in name, but in spirit. Emily, sitting quietly at the far end of the table, met her father's eyes. They both remembered nights spent reviewing contracts in Sarah's hospital room, strategy sessions interrupted by medical emergencies, the delicate balance of business and family they'd learned to navigate. The Shanghai project can wait, Richard declared. Some opportunities come only once, yes, but so do some moments. I choose the moments. Later in his office, Emily found him packing personal items into a box. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "are you sure about this? Mum wouldn't want you to sacrifice everything you've built." Richard picked up a framed photograph himself and Sarah in their youth, taken just weeks before their separation. Next to it stood a newer image, their hospital room wedding, Sarah pale but radiant, Emily beaming beside them. "I built this empire because I thought success would fill the emptiness inside me," he explained, wrapping both frames carefully. "But true wealth isn't in skyscrapers or stock options. It's in the moments we share with those we love." His phone buzzed another message from the Shanghai partners, threatening to withdraw. Richard silenced it without looking. "Your mother taught me that love is a choice we make every day. Today I choose her. I choose you. I choose our family." Emily helped him pack, each object a piece of the life he'd built while trying to forget Sarah. "The board's wrong, you know," he said suddenly. "You're not too young. I was younger than you when I started this company." "But you did it alone," Emily replied. "I have you." Richard paused, holding his nameplate Richard Sterling, CEO, engraved in gold. "I did it alone because I thought that's what strength meant. You're smarter than I was. You know, true strength comes from letting people in, from choosing love over pride." They took the box down together, past surprised employees and whispered conversations. In the lobby, Richard stopped at the security desk, handing over his executive access card. "Take care of my daughter," he told George, the head of security who'd worked there since the beginning. "She's everything I worked for, everything I'm proud of." In the car, Emily asked quietly, "Do you regret it? Choosing us over the company?" Richard thought of Sarah waiting in her hospital room, of the precious time they had left, of the daughter beside him who carried both their strengths. "The only regret I have," he answered, "is that it took me so long to understand what really matters." The old hospital records lay scattered across Sarah's bed, yellowed pages revealing a truth that changed everything. "There was a mix-up," Sarah whispered, her trembling fingers tracing the documents. "Grace didn't die that night." Emily sat frozen, the world tilting beneath her. Richard gripped the bedrail, his knuckles white. Rachel, standing in the doorway, made a small sound of recognition. "I saw her," Rachel said softly. "That night in the nursery. They had 2 babies listed under Mitchell, 1 critical, 1 healthy. I thought I was hallucinating from grief and guilt." Her voice trailed off as the implications sank in. Sarah's voice grew stronger, urgent with confession. "They told me Grace had died, showed me a tiny body. I was so grief-stricken, I never thought to question, never looked closely enough. But these records show a transfer to another hospital that same night. A baby girl, same birth weight as Grace, listed as critical but stable." Richard was already on his phone, calling in every favor, every connection he had. Within hours, a trail emerged. A baby transferred to Boston Children's Hospital, adopted through an emergency placement when no family claimed her. A little girl who grew up just 3 hours away from her twin sister. "Her name is Hannah Porter," now the investigator reported. 23 years old, works as a pediatric nurse in Hartford. Her adoptive parents were told she was abandoned at birth. Emily stared at the photograph in her hands, a young woman who could have been her reflection. The same eyes, same smile, same tiny scar above her eyebrow. She looks just like she couldn't finish. Like you, Sarah completed, tears streaming down her face. My girls. Both of my girls alive. The decision to contact Hannah was unanimous, but the approach had to be careful. Richard insisted on having medical records ready to prove their claim. Sarah, despite her weakening condition, wrote a letter explaining everything. Hannah arrived at the hospital 3 days later, her face a mirror of Emily's confusion and hope. She stood in the doorway of Sarah's room, clutching her own set of adoption papers, staring at the family she'd never known existed. I always felt like something was missing, Hannah whispered. Like part of me was somewhere else. Her eyes met Emily's, and something electric passed between them, a connection that transcended their separation. Sarah reached out both hands, one to each daughter. My babies, she breathed. Together again. The twins approached the bed from opposite sides, their movements unconsciously synchronized. As their hands joined with Sarah's, the room seemed to hold its breath. Richard watched his daughters, both his daughters, unite with their mother, his heart so full it hurt. I used to dream about you, Hannah admitted to Emily. A girl who looked like me, who knew what I was thinking before I said it. I told myself I was being silly. I had the same dreams, Emily replied. Mom gave me a locket with your picture, Grace's picture, but I never imagined. The sisters clung to each other, 23 years of separation dissolving in an instant. Sarah watched them through tears of joy and pain, joy at seeing her daughters reunited, pain knowing her time with them would be so short. Hannah, it turned out, had inherited her mother's medical intuition. Looking at Sarah with professional eyes, she immediately understood the gravity of her condition. How long, she asked quietly, when Emily stepped out to get coffee. Weeks, maybe days, Sarah replied honestly. But now I can go peacefully, knowing you're both safe, knowing you found each other. The sisters spent every possible moment together, making up for lost time. They discovered shared interests, identical gestures, the same laugh. Hannah brought her adoption records, Emily shared her childhood photos, and together they pieced together the story of their separation and reunion. Richard watched his daughters bond, saw how they unconsciously mirrored each other's movements, finished each other's sentences. They're extraordinary, he told Sarah one evening, just like their mother. Sarah smiled, weaker now but more peaceful. The family is complete now, she whispered. Everything I ever wanted for them, love, connection, understanding, they have it all. Hannah took leave from her nursing job to stay close, joining Emily in caring for their mother. The twins worked in perfect harmony, their separated years falling away as their innate connection grew stronger. Rachel Turner died on a quiet Thursday morning, not from her suicide attempt, but from an aneurysm doctors had missed during her recovery. She was alone in her hospital room when it happened, having insisted that Michael go home to rest. The final letter found clutched in her hand would change everything. Dear Sarah, it began, by the time you read this I'll be gone. Not by my own hand this time. The doctors told me about the aneurysm last week. I chose not to tell anyone because I wanted my last days to be about truth, not pity. Emily found her aunt first, during her morning rounds between hospital rooms. The peaceful expression on Rachel's face belied the explosive contents of her confession. As the family gathered, Michael clutching his father's arm for support, Sarah insisted on being wheeled in from her own room to hear the letter read. The truth is darker than what I've told you, Richard read aloud, his voice steady even as his hands shook. Charles Mitchell didn't act alone. Mother was more than just willfully blind, she was complicit. There were others, powerful men who visited our house late at night. She traded her daughter's innocence for social position and financial security. Sarah's already pale face went white. Long buried memories surfaced, unexplained absences, mysterious gifts, her mother's insistence that she attend certain parties. She'd been protected by her age and her early departure for college, but Rachel. I kept records, the letter continued. Names, dates, bank transfers, everything is in a safety deposit box at First National, key taped to the back of this letter. Use it, Sarah. Use it to make sure no other child suffers what we did. But remember, some of these men are still powerful, still dangerous. Be careful." The revelation sent shockwaves through the family. Michael, learning the full extent of his mother's trauma, finally understood the constant moving, the paranoia, the desperate need to protect him from shadows he'd never seen. Emily and Hannah held each other, their twin bond providing strength as they watched their mother process decades of hidden truth. Richard immediately moved to protect his family, hiring additional security and beginning a careful investigation into the names Rachel had exposed. But the emotional impact proved harder to guard against. Sarah's condition deteriorated as she grappled with memories and guilt, realizing how close she'd come to her sister's fate. "I should have known," she whispered one night, clutching Rachel's letter. "I should have seen." "You were a child yourself," Richard reminded her gently. "The adults who should have protected you both failed." Rachel understood that in the end. The funeral was small, attended only by family. Michael stood between Emily and Hannah, accepting their support as he said goodbye to his mother. The twins had become his protective older sisters, their own loss making them fierce in their love for their cousin. But Rachel's death brought an unexpected gift: healing. Her final confession freed Sarah and Michael from decades of uncertainty, gave them answers they'd needed but been afraid to seek. The evidence she'd gathered would eventually bring justice, though she wouldn't live to see it. "She died making things right," Michael said at the memorial service. "She spent years running from the truth, but in the end she faced it. She made sure we could all face it." In Sarah's hospital room, now crowded with Rachel's plants and photographs, the family began the process of rebuilding. Hannah and Emily took turns reading their aunt's journals, understanding finally the complex web of pain and love that had shaped their family. The truth Rachel revealed would have far-reaching consequences, but her greatest legacy was the healing her death set in motion. In facing her own demons, she gave her family the strength to face theirs. The oncology team delivered the news with professional compassion. The cancer had spread to Sarah's brain. Multiple tumors, inoperable. Even with aggressive treatment, she had weeks at most. The family absorbed this information in Sarah's hospital room, each processing the inevitable in their own way. Hannah, drawing on her nursing experience, immediately began reviewing the pain management protocols. Emily buried herself in research papers, searching for experimental treatments. Richard sat silently holding Sarah's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, just as he had done 23 years ago. "No more treatments," Sarah announced, her voice weak but determined. "I want to be present for whatever time I have left. No more chemicals making me too sick to think or speak." The twins started to protest, but something in their mother's expression stopped them. "Your mother's right," Richard said, surprising everyone. "We need to respect her wishes." Quality of time over quantity. His voice broke on the last word, and Emily realized she'd never seen her father cry before. The next few days saw Sarah's hospital room transformed. The medical equipment was minimized, replaced with comfortable furnishings from home. Family photos covered the walls, and a small garden of potted plants brought nature indoors. The twins took turns staying overnight, neither willing to miss a moment. Sarah, freed from the brutal chemotherapy regimen, had periods of surprising clarity. She used these precious hours to share stories, pass on family history, and most importantly, strengthen the bonds between her newly reunited daughters. "Watch how Hannah bites her lip when she's worried," she told Emily one afternoon. "You do the exact same thing. And Emily, your laugh, Hannah had it first. I remember hearing it the day you were born." The sisters absorbed every detail, building a bridge across their years of separation. They discovered shared allergies, identical birthmarks, the same habit of humming while concentrating. Each similarity was a gift, a confirmation of their connection. Richard rarely left Sarah's side, conducting business via phone when absolutely necessary. The board's complaints about his absence fell on deaf ears. He'd missed 23 years, he wouldn't miss these final days. "Remember our first date?" Sarah asked him during a midnight conversation. "You were so nervous you knocked over your water glass 3 times. 4 times, Richard corrected, smiling at the memory. "The waiter finally brought me a sippy cup. I was mortified, but you just laughed that wonderful laugh that made me fall in love with you." The hardest moments came at night when pain broke through the medication barrier. Hannah and Emily worked in seamless synchronization, one adjusting medications while the other soothed their mother. Richard would pace helplessly, his wealth and power useless against this enemy he couldn't buy off or outmaneuver. Sarah's lucid periods grew shorter, her pain more difficult to manage. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about hospice care, but the family refused to move her. They'd created their own version of hospice, with Hannah's medical knowledge and Richard's resources ensuring Sarah had everything she needed. "Promise me something," Sarah said during one clear moment, gathering her family close. "Promise you'll stay together after. After. The 4 of you, you're meant to be a family. Don't let anything separate you again." They promised through tears, the twins holding hands across their mother's bed, Richard standing sentinel at the foot, his usual corporate armor stripped away to reveal simply a man about to lose his love twice. "I've been blessed," Sarah whispered, "to find my love again, to see my daughters reunited, to know my family is whole at last. Some people never get such gifts." While the Sterling family kept vigil at Sarah's bedside, Marcus Bennett made his move. The emergency board meeting was called without notifying either Richard or Emily, taking advantage of their distraction. The proposal was simple but devastating: a vote of no confidence in the Sterling leadership, followed by an immediate sale to Westbrook Industries. "The Sterlings have abandoned their responsibilities," Marcus declared to the assembled board members. "Richard has effectively disappeared, leaving an inexperienced daughter in charge during a crucial period. Westbrook's offer represents the best interests of our shareholders." Emily received the news via text from a loyal board member while changing her mother's IV bags. Her hands shook as she read the message: "Emergency vote in 30 minutes. Takeover imminent. Need you here." "Go," Sarah whispered, having seen the message. "Save your father's legacy. Hannah will stay with me." Emily arrived at Sterling Global still wearing her hospital comfort clothes, her hair hastily pulled back. She strode into the boardroom just as the vote was about to begin, her father's determination evident in every step. "Before you vote," she announced, her voice carrying the same authority that had made Richard Sterling a legend, "you should know that Westbrook Industries is under federal investigation for securities fraud." She placed a thick folder on the table. "Their offer isn't a lifeline, it's a desperate attempt to hide their assets before the indictments come down." Marcus's face went pale. He couldn't have known about the investigation. Emily had discovered it during her late-night research sessions at the hospital, looking for anything to protect her family's interests. "Sterling Global isn't failing," Emily continued, pulling up projection charts on the boardroom screen. "Our Asian markets are stable, European expansion is ahead of schedule, and our charitable foundation's work has generated unprecedented goodwill. What we're facing isn't a crisis of leadership, but a crisis of loyalty." She turned to face Marcus directly. "Did you tell the board about your private meetings with Westbrook? About your guaranteed position as CEO after the takeover? About the offshore accounts set up to handle your commission?" The boardroom erupted in chaos. Marcus attempted to speak but was drowned out by angry questions from other members. Emily stayed calm, presenting evidence of his betrayal with precise, devastating accuracy. "My father built this company on trust and integrity," she said finally. "He's not absent, he's showing exactly those values by being with my mother in her final days. Would you really prefer leadership that puts profit above family, numbers above human dignity?" The vote, when it came, was unanimous in support of keeping Sterling Global under family control. Marcus was escorted from the building by security, his dreams of power crumbling around him. Emily returned to the hospital victorious but exhausted. She found Richard in the hallway outside Sarah's room, having just heard about the attempted takeover. "But you shouldn't have had to handle that alone," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I should have been there." "You were exactly where you needed to be," Emily replied. "Everything you taught me about business, about integrity, that's what saved the company today. And everything Mum taught me about fighting for what matters. That's what made me strong enough to do it." They entered Sarah's room together, finding Hannah reading softly to their sleeping mother. The crisis had been averted, the company saved, but looking at Sarah's peaceful face, they knew what really mattered couldn't be measured in stock prices or market shares. "The company will be there tomorrow," Emily said softly. "Tonight we're just family." Hannah's breakdown came unexpectedly during one of Sarah's better days. They had been sharing childhood stories when Sarah mentioned a lullaby she used to sing to Emily. Without warning, Hannah fled the room, her nurse's composure shattering completely. Emily found her twin in the hospital chapel, rocking back and forth in the last pew, tears streaming down her face. "I remember that song," Hannah whispered as Emily sat beside her. "But my adoptive mother never sang it, but I knew it. I would hum it to myself in foster homes before the Porters adopted me. How did I know it?" The revelation opened a floodgate. Hannah began experiencing vivid flashbacks, sensations and memories from their first 6 hours together as newborns. The feel of Emily's tiny hand touching hers in their shared incubator, their mother's voice singing softly, the traumatic separation that followed. "The doctors called it cellular memory," Hannah explained through tears. "Twins share a bond that starts before birth. Being separated so young, so violently, my body remembered even if my mind couldn't." Emily held her sister as years of unexplained anxiety and depression finally made sense. Hannah had always felt incomplete, spending years in therapy, trying to understand the constant sense of loss that haunted her. Now they knew she had been mourning her twin without knowing she existed. "I used to dream about you," Hannah confessed. "In my nightmares I was always searching for someone, reaching out in darkness. I would wake up screaming, my arms aching to hold someone who wasn't there." Sarah, when told about Hannah's struggles, revealed her own guilt. "I should have questioned more, searched harder," she said weakly. "A mother should know if her child is truly gone." Richard immediately arranged for the best trauma specialists, but Hannah resisted traditional therapy. "I don't need to talk about my feelings," she insisted. "I need to understand who I am, who we are together." The sisters began spending their free moments exploring their connection. They discovered shared memories they couldn't possibly have experienced together, the same recurring dreams, identical fears, simultaneous reactions to situations. Their bond, suppressed for 23 years, emerged stronger for having been denied. "It's like finding a part of my soul I didn't know was missing," Hannah explained to their father one evening. "But now that I've found it, the pain of having lost it for so long is almost unbearable." The hospital staff watched in amazement as the twins operated in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's needs without words. When one felt distress, the other would appear moments later, drawn by an invisible thread of connection. But with their mother's condition deteriorating, Hannah's trauma intensified. The prospect of losing Sarah so soon after finding her proved almost too much to bear. She began having panic attacks, terrified that Emily would somehow be taken from her too. "I can't lose anyone else," she sobbed one night as Emily held her. "I can't survive being alone again." "You're not alone," Emily promised fiercely. "You're never going to be alone again. We're twins, two halves of one whole. Nothing can separate us now." The elderly nurse entered Sarah's hospital room quietly, her weathered hands clutching a worn leather bag. She had worked at this hospital for 40 years, known only as Nurse Margaret. But as she approached Sarah's bed, Richard Sterling froze, recognizing a face he hadn't seen in 35 years. "Mum," he whispered, hardly believing his eyes. The twins looked up sharply, while Sarah managed a weak smile of recognition. Margaret Sterling had aged since abandoning her 7-year-old son at St. Michael's, her once dark hair now completely white. "Hello, Richard," she said softly. "I've been watching over your family for a very long time." But the truth emerged like water from a broken dam. Margaret had been working at this very hospital the night Sarah gave birth to the twins. She had recognized her son's name on the admission forms and, consumed by guilt over abandoning him, had been too ashamed to reveal herself. Instead, she had appointed herself the silent guardian of his family. "I was there when Grace was transferred," she explained, tears rolling down her lined face. "I tried to stop it, to tell them there had been a mistake, but by then the adoption papers were signed. I've carried that guilt every day since." For 23 years, Margaret had watched over Sarah and Emily from afar. She made sure they always had the best medical care, anonymously covered bills when money was tight, and kept detailed records of every milestone in Emily's life to share with Richard someday. The Christmas presents, Emily realized suddenly, the ones that always appeared on our doorstep when Mom was struggling, that was you. Margaret nodded. "It was the least I could do for my granddaughter. For both my granddaughters," she added, looking at Hannah with tears in her eyes. Sarah reached for Margaret's hand. "You were always there," she said softly. "Every time I was at my lowest, somehow things would work out. A bill would mysteriously be paid, a scholarship would appear, a better apartment would become available." Richard stood by the window, his back rigid with emotion. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why stay hidden all these years?" "Shame," Margaret answered simply. "I abandoned you, Richard. What right did I have to claim your family as my own?" She opened her leather bag, removing a thick album. "But I kept everything. Every newspaper article about your success, every photograph I could take of Sarah and Emily from a distance. I watched my son become a great man, and my granddaughter grow into an amazing woman, even if I could only love you from afar." The album told the story of two parallel lives: Richard's rise to success documented in press clippings, alongside candid photos of Sarah and Emily that captured moments he had missed: Emily's first steps, school plays, graduation. Margaret had created a bridge across their years of separation, preserving memories that would otherwise have been lost. "I'm dying," Sarah said gently. "Our family needs to be whole now, Margaret. No more shadows, no more secrets." Margaret broke down, decades of controlled emotion finally releasing. Richard moved instinctively to support her, his first act of caring for the mother who had left him so long ago. The twins watched in silence as another piece of their family puzzle fell into place. Margaret's hospital records revealed a conspiracy more complex than anyone had imagined. The night the twins were born, a wealthy couple had lost their baby in the same hospital. The husband, a prominent hospital board member, had used his influence to orchestrate an unthinkable switch. "They told me Grace was dead," Sarah whispered, clutching the yellow documents Margaret had preserved. "But they actually took her because the Porters had lost their baby and they didn't want a scandal." Margaret's detailed notes painted a devastating picture. The hospital administrator had been bribed, death certificates forged, and adoption papers falsified. Grace became Hannah Porter, while her grieving birth family believed she had died. "I tried to stop it," Margaret explained, her voice shaking. "But by the time I gathered enough evidence, Hannah was legally adopted. The Porters had no idea they truly believed they were adopting an abandoned child." The twins sat together on Sarah's bed, holding hands as they learned the truth of their separation. The doctor who had declared Grace critical had been paid off. The nurse who handed Sarah a deceased baby had been given a promotion and transferred to another state. "I kept everything," Margaret continued, spreading more documents across the bed. "Every memo, every altered record, every signature on every falsified document. I knew someday the truth would need to come out." Richard, his legal mind already working, saw the implications immediately. "This isn't just malpractice," he said grimly. "This is criminal conspiracy. There could be other cases, other families torn apart by these people." Hannah spoke for the first time since the revelations began. "The Porters, my adoptive parents, they're good people. They love me, gave me everything. They can't know about this. It would destroy them." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand. "They are good people," she agreed softly. "They gave you a wonderful life when I couldn't be there. They're part of our family too now." Emily studied a photograph of herself and Hannah as newborns, taken moments before they were separated. "Look at our hospital bracelets," she said suddenly. "They switched them. That's why the records show Grace as the critical baby. They physically swapped our identities." Margaret nodded. The original plan was to take Emily because she was stronger, but when they switched the bracelets, they accidentally took Hannah instead. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late to switch back without raising suspicions. The truth of their separation, finally revealed in all its cruel complexity, left the family reeling. The painful randomness of it, that a simple bracelet swap had determined their fate, seemed almost too much to bear. Richard pulled his mother aside while the others processed the revelation. "Why reveal all this now?" he asked quietly. "Why not take this secret to your grave?" Margaret looked at her granddaughters, at Sarah's pale face, at the family she had watched from shadows for so long. "Because secrets poison family," she replied. "I've lived with too many of them. It's time for truth, time for healing, even if that healing hurts at first." Among Rachel's final possessions, the family found a small leather diary, its pages filled with the raw truth she'd never been able to speak aloud. The entries began when she was 12, documenting a descent into darkness that would shape 3 generations of their family. "Mother's new husband came to my room again," one entry read. "Sarah was at debate club. Mother was at her charity meeting. They always make sure Sarah is away when it happens. They're protecting her, but who's protecting me?" Reading the diary together in Sarah's hospital room, the family discovered the full extent of the conspiracy of silence. Their mother had deliberately scheduled Sarah's activities to leave Rachel alone with Charles Mitchell. The business associates who visited late at night, the expensive gifts that appeared without explanation, everything took on a sinister new meaning. "I tried to tell Sarah once," Rachel had written. "But Mother said if I did, they'd hurt her too. Said they'd make sure she never got into nursing school, never escaped this house. So I stayed quiet. I learned to disappear inside myself when they came." Sarah clutched Emily's hand as Richard read aloud, her face wet with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. "All those times I told her to try harder, to be more like me. I didn't know what she was enduring." The diary revealed how Rachel's trauma had twisted her understanding of love and family. When she saw Sarah happy with Richard, expecting twins, it triggered something broken inside her. "Sarah's having the life I can never have," she wrote. "Every time I see them together, I remember what was taken from me. Why should she get to be happy when I'm still drowning in darkness?" Hannah, with her medical training, recognized the patterns of PTSD in Rachel's writings. The constant moving, the overprotection of Michael, the inability to form lasting relationships, all stemmed from wounds inflicted in that childhood bedroom. The worst part wasn't the abuse, one entry read. It was Mother brushing my hair afterward, telling me what a good girl I was, how I was helping the family. She made it seem normal, made me feel like I was choosing it. Sometimes I still hear her voice, telling me I'm special, chosen. It makes me sick." Richard had to stop reading several times, overcome by the horror of what his sister-in-law had endured. The successful businessman, used to solving problems with money and power, felt helpless before the evidence of such calculated cruelty. The final pages revealed Rachel's eventual breaking point. "When I sent that message to Richard, separating him from Sarah, I thought I was protecting her. In my twisted mind, I believed all men would eventually hurt her like they hurt me. But I was wrong. I didn't save her, I just passed my pain on to her, to Emily, to Emily, to Emma. The cycle has to stop." Emily and Hannah held each other as the last entries were read, understanding finally the aunt they'd barely known. Rachel's final words were an apology and a warning. "Sarah, forgive me. I loved you the only way I knew how, through a broken lens. Emily, Hannah, protect each other. Don't let anyone separate you again. And Richard, the evidence I've gathered isn't just about Charles. There are names, dates, records. Use them. Make sure no other child endures what I did. Sarah stared at the diary in silence long after Richard finished reading. We were all victims, she said finally. Rachel, me, our mother in her own way. But Rachel bore the worst of it, and I never saw. I never understood why she changed, why she pulled away. I failed her as a sister. No, Richard said firmly. The only ones who failed were the adults who should have protected you both. Rachel understood that in the end. That's why she left us this truth. In Sarah's final days, as her strength ebbed, she revealed the full extent of her own sacrifices, not in grand confessions, but in quiet moments, in stories shared between doses of morphine, in treasured mementos finally explained. I sold my engagement ring, she told Richard one evening, her voice barely a whisper. The one you gave me before you left. Emily needed braces and insurance wouldn't cover it. I told her it was lost. She smiled weakly. She had your smile, you see. I couldn't bear to see it crooked. The twins discovered a box of uncashed checks, each made out to Sarah from Margaret over the years. On the back of each was written the same message for Emily's future. Sarah had never cashed them, too proud to accept help, determined to provide for her daughter on her own. I worked 3 jobs when Emily was small, Sarah confessed. Day shift at the hospital, evening waitressing, night shifts at a convenience store. The neighbors thought I had a nanny. It was just careful scheduling and a lot of coffee. Hannah found her mother's nursing credentials, noting the perfect attendance record spanning 2 decades. You never took a sick day, she said wonderingly. Sarah's response caught in her throat. Emily needed health insurance. If I lost my job, we lost everything. The truth of Sarah's quiet heroism emerged in layers. She had taken extra shifts during holidays so other nurses could be with their families, banking the overtime pay for Emily's college fund. She had walked 3 miles to work during snowstorms rather than miss a day. She had donated blood regularly for the extra money it brought, even when she was exhausted from her multiple jobs. The hardest part wasn't the work, Sarah told her daughters. It was coming home too tired to play, seeing Emily trying to be so grown up, so understanding. She learned to cook her own dinner at 8, because I was usually sleeping between shifts. Richard discovered Sarah had been offered promotions multiple times but turned them down. The higher positions would have meant irregular hours, interrupting the delicate balance she'd created to be there for Emily's important moments. I chose time over money, she explained. Emily needed her mother more than we needed a bigger apartment. The hospital records showed Sarah had worked in the cancer ward for years, caring for terminal patients while building a network of doctors who would later help with her own treatment. She had known the signs of her illness long before she sought help, delaying her own care until Emily's search for Richard was complete. A mother's strength isn't in never being afraid, Sarah told Hannah during a late-night conversation. It's in facing that fear and moving forward anyway. Every day I was terrified of failing Emily, of not being enough. But fear doesn't feed a child or pay bills or heal wounds. Love does that. Emily found her old report cards, each one signed in her mother's neat handwriting despite exhaustion, each achievement celebrated with small treats Sarah could barely afford. There were careful notes about parent-teacher conferences attended between shifts, school plays watched in nursing scrubs, birthday cakes baked at midnight. Your mother, Margaret told them, was the strongest person I've ever known. Not because she never broke down, she did, often, in the hospital chapel where she thought no one could see, but because she got up every time, wiped her tears, and went back to being the mother you needed. Sarah's final sacrifice had been delaying her cancer treatment, knowing it might cost her life but determined to see her family whole again. Some things, she whispered to Richard, are worth dying for. Seeing our daughters together, seeing you with them, that was worth everything. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Hannah, during her rounds at Hartford General, overheard two oncologists discussing a new treatment protocol that had shown remarkable results in cases similar to Sarah's. Within hours, both sisters were poring over medical journals, their twin minds working in perfect synchronization. But it's a combination therapy, Hannah explained to Richard, spreading research papers across Sarah's hospital room. Traditional treatment enhanced by targeted immunotherapy. They've had success rates of 60% in cases that were considered terminal. The treatment was expensive and not covered by insurance. Richard didn't hesitate. Whatever it costs, he said firmly, already making calls to arrange for Sarah's inclusion in the program. Emily worked through the night preparing the necessary documentation while Hannah used her medical connections to expedite the approval process. Sarah initially resisted. "You've all done enough," she protested weakly. "Maybe it's time to accept," but the twins wouldn't hear of it. Their combined determination a force that even their mother's stubbornness couldn't resist. The first weeks of treatment were brutal. Sarah's already weakened body struggled with the aggressive therapy. The twins took turns staying with her, developing an intricate system of care that merged Hannah's medical knowledge with Emily's organizational skills. Richard rarely left her side, his business empire running on autopilot as he focused solely on supporting his wife. Then, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Sarah's blood work showed improvement. The tumors stopped growing. Her energy slowly returned, bringing with it the spark that had dimmed in her eyes. "The cancer cells are responding," her oncologist announced 6 weeks into treatment. Better than we'd hoped. The family held their breath, afraid to believe in miracles after so much heartbreak. By the 3rd month, Sarah was sitting up in bed, eating solid food again. Her hair began to grow back, silver-streaked but thick. She started physical therapy, rebuilding strength that months of illness had stolen. "It's not just the treatment," her doctor confided to Richard. "Medical science can only do so much. The rest is the patient's will to live, and Sarah has something powerful to live for, a family finally made whole." The day Sarah took her first unassisted steps down the hospital corridor, all 4 of her protectors were there, Richard holding her hand, the twins hovering anxiously nearby, Margaret watching with tears of joy. Each step was a victory, each breath a gift. "I couldn't leave you yet," Sarah told them later. "Not when we've only just become the family we were always meant to be." She reached for Richard's hand, smiling at their daughters. "Besides, someone needs to keep you all in line." Recovery was slow but steady. There would be ongoing treatments, regular monitoring, and a lifetime of precautions. But Sarah was alive, growing stronger each day, her survival as much a testament to love's power as to medical science. Sometimes, she told her family, miracles don't look like we expect. Sometimes they look like family pulling together, like sisters finding each other, like old wounds finally healing. She smiled at Richard. Like love getting a second chance. The Sterling family gathered in the garden of their new home, a sprawling estate with enough room for everyone. Sarah, now strong enough to walk unaided, sat in her favorite wicker chair while Richard tended to his newly planted roses. The twins were setting up for dinner on the patio, moving in their characteristic synchronized dance, while Margaret supervised with grandmotherly pride. The Porters, Hannah's adoptive parents, had been invited for the weekly family dinner, a tradition that began after Sarah's recovery. Initially awkward, these gatherings had evolved into genuine celebrations of their unique family bond. John and Mary Porter had struggled at first with the truth about Hannah's adoption, but Sarah's gracious acceptance of their role in her daughter's life had paved the way for healing. "We didn't lose a daughter," Sarah had told them. "We gained another family." The Porters had wept with relief, their guilt over unknowingly participating in the hospital's deception finally easing. Michael, still dealing with his mother Rachel's loss, found comfort in his expanded family. He spent weekends with his cousins, the twins helping him process his grief while teaching him to channel his mother's strength rather than her pain. Richard had taken the boy under his wing, mentoring him in business while ensuring he never felt alone. Margaret's integration into the family had been perhaps the most profound transformation. Her years of secret guardianship were over, replaced by an open and loving relationship with her son, daughters-in-law, and grandchildren. She and Richard spent long hours together, healing old wounds through honest conversation and shared memories. Forgiveness, Sarah often said, is like a garden. It needs constant tending, but what grows from it is beautiful. She would look around at their blended family, biological and adopted, lost and found, and marvel at how love could transform pain into peace. The evidence Rachel had gathered against Charles Mitchell and his associates had been carefully handled, resulting in quiet but firm justice. The men involved faced consequences for their actions, while the families affected received support and counseling. Richard had established a foundation in Rachel's name, dedicated to helping victims of abuse rebuild their lives. Emily and Hannah's bond grew stronger each day, their separation healed through shared purpose and understanding. They worked together at Sterling Global, their complementary skills making them a formidable team. But more importantly, they had each other. The missing piece each had felt throughout their lives finally found. "We're not just healing our family," Emily remarked one evening, watching the sunset with her sister. "We're breaking the cycle of pain that affected so many lives." Sarah looked at her gathered family, her husband planting new life in the garden, her daughters whole and strong, her mother-in-law finding peace, her nephew learning to smile again, and felt profound gratitude. They had faced death, separation, betrayal, and pain, yet emerged stronger, bound together by love that transcended biology and time. This she said softly to Richard as he joined her, dirt still on his hands from the garden. "This is what I always dreamed of. Not just survival, but real healing, real joy." The Sterling Foundation for Single Mothers opened its doors on a bright spring morning, housed in a renovated Victorian mansion in the heart of the city. Sarah cut the ribbon with trembling hands, surrounded by her family and the first group of mothers the foundation would support. "No mother should have to choose between working 3 jobs and seeing their child grow up," Sarah declared in her opening speech. "No child should miss their mother's presence because she's too busy surviving to truly live." The foundation, born from Sarah's own struggles, offered comprehensive support, housing assistance, childcare, educational scholarships, and medical care. Emily and Hannah co-directed the organization, bringing their unique perspectives and skills to its management. Emily handled the business aspects, while Hannah oversaw the medical care program. Richard had converted an entire floor into a state-of-the-art daycare center, remembering how Sarah had worried about childcare during Emily's early years. The center operated 24 hours a day, accommodating mothers who worked night shifts or irregular hours. Every detail matters, Sarah insisted during the planning stages. These women need more than just financial help. They need dignity, respect, and the chance to be present in their children's lives. The educational program, inspired by Sarah's determination to keep Emily in school, despite their circumstances, provided both mothers and children with learning opportunities. Mothers could earn degrees or vocational certifications while their children received tutoring and enrichment activities. Margaret contributed her nursing expertise to establish a health clinic within the foundation, ensuring that no mother would have to delay medical care due to cost or time constraints. The clinic was named Rachel's Haven, honoring the aunt whose tragedy had helped shape their family's dedication to healing and protection. The foundation quickly became a model for similar programs nationwide. Richard used his business connections to secure corporate partnerships, creating job opportunities for mothers completing the foundation's training programs. The Sterling Global Board, once focused solely on profit, now measured success partly by their social impact. Each room in the foundation building told a story. The library housed books donated by Hannah's adoptive parents, the Porters. The computer lab was equipped by Michael, who had found his calling in technology. The garden, tended by Richard himself, provided fresh vegetables for the foundation's families. "Every mother here reminds me of you," Emily told Sarah one evening as they watched mothers and children leaving the day's programs. Strong, determined, refusing to let circumstances define their children's futures. The Foundation's first success story was a young mother named Lisa, who had arrived with a 2-year-old daughter and a dream of becoming a nurse. Within 2 years, supported by the Foundation's resources, she had completed her nursing degree and was working at the same hospital where Sarah had spent her career. "You showed me it was possible," Lisa told Sarah at her graduation ceremony, "not just to survive, but to thrive, to give my daughter the mother she deserves to have." Sarah often sat in the Foundation's garden, watching mothers read to their children or study for classes, seeing in them the same fierce love that had driven her own journey. The sight of children playing freely while their mothers pursued their dreams was the sweetest reward for all they had endured. This she told Richard as they observed a mother and daughter planting flowers together. "This is how we change the world. One family at a time, one mother at a time, one child at a time." 5 years after Sarah's recovery, the Sterling family gathered at their summer house to celebrate multiple milestones. Emily's engagement to David, a kind-hearted pediatrician she'd met through the Foundation. Hannah's appointment as Chief of Pediatric Nursing at Hartford General. Michael's graduation from business school. But most importantly, Sarah's 5th year of being cancer-free. The garden was alive with laughter and conversation. Richard, now semi-retired, proudly showed off his prize-winning roses while discussing expansion plans for the Foundation with Emily and her fiancé. The business titan had softened over the years, finding more joy in nurturing flowers and family than in corporate conquests. Hannah and her adoptive parents chatted with Sarah about the upcoming hospital fundraiser. The Porters had become integral members of the extended family, their initial awkwardness long since transformed into genuine affection. They now had twice the grandchildren to spoil, as both Emily and Hannah had given them permission to claim grandparental rights. Margaret, surrounded by photo albums, regaled Michael with stories of his cousin's childhood adventures, both the ones she'd witnessed from afar and the newer memories she'd been part of. Her role as family historian had become precious to them all, bridging past and present with understanding and love. Sarah watched it all from her favorite garden chair, her silver hair catching the afternoon sun. She was stronger now than she'd been in years, her recovery defying all medical predictions. But her greatest healing had come from seeing her family whole and happy. "Penny for your thoughts," Richard asked, joining her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I was just thinking about Grace," Sarah replied softly. "How even in leaving us she brought us together. Her spirit led Hannah back to us, led you back to me." They watched as the twins synchronized without thinking, Emily passing Hannah a plate just as she reached for it, Hannah answering Emily's unspoken question with a nod. Their connection, once severed by circumstances, had grown stronger through understanding their past. Michael had grown into a thoughtful young man, carrying his mother Rachel's strength without her burdens. He worked part-time at the Foundation while finishing his degree, determined to honor her memory by helping others heal from trauma. The Sterling Foundation had expanded across the country, its success measured not in profits but in families healed, dreams achieved, and cycles of pain broken. Emily and Hannah's dual leadership had created a model of compassionate efficiency that other organizations sought to emulate. "We've come full circle," Sarah mused, taking Richard's hand, from being separated by lies to being united by truth, from broken pieces to a whole that's stronger for having been broken. The evening ended with their tradition of stargazing blankets spread on the lawn, family members pointing out constellations and sharing dreams. They had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future rich enough to embrace it all, the pain and joy, the losses and gains, the endings and beginnings. To Grace, Emily raised her glass in their traditional toast. To Rachel, Hannah added. To family, they all echoed, their voices joining under the vast sky. Sarah looked at her gathered family, biological and chosen, lost and found, and felt complete. They had weathered storms together, faced truths both beautiful and painful, and emerged stronger for it all. Their story, she realized, was still being written, each day adding new chapters of love, healing, and hope. Dear viewers, we hope this story of love, forgiveness, and family healing has touched your hearts. If you found yourself moved by the journey of Richard, Sarah, Emily, Hannah, and their path to reconciliation, we would be truly grateful if you could leave a comment sharing your thoughts and experiences. Your support means the world to us. Please consider subscribing to our channel to join our storytelling community and stay updated on more heartwarming narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships. If this story resonated with you, share it with your friends and family who might find comfort or inspiration in its message. Don't forget to like this video to help us reach more viewers who might need to hear this story of hope and healing. Every like, comment, and share helps us continue creating meaningful content that celebrates the power of love and forgiveness. Thank you for being part of our journey. We look forward to sharing many more stories with you.